Hi, welcome back guys. This is your sensei, back with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Naruto Went Against the Gods? Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Marika had miscalculated. Trapped within the Erd Tree as she was, she had been able to do naught but sublimely fester on the rights and wrongs of everything from eons past to the shattering and the here and now. Bound in this gilded prison with her diametrically opposed other half, Radagon, it was unpleasant, to say the least. So many mistakes, so many foolish choices that, looking back, she could have avoided. But even now, in this dark other space at the heart of this hated oak, illuminated by nothing more than the shattered remnants of the ring, still incurably bound to her body and soul, Marika was not idle. She could feel the pitch and yore of the world through the ring and its shattered remnants, each desperately trying to resolve adherence to the greater will blast it to the finest ash, and the lingering grace that she had set in motion. She had planned to turn from the greater will, locking the outer god's influence from the lands between and letting its denizens, deities and cryptids flourish and wither under her grace, her order, her reign, not some incorporeal cosmic voice calling for order from beyond the furthest stars. Why? Yet seeing her Godwin, her sweet boy, butchered at the hands of that feculent stepdaughter Ranni's plans, it had forced her rebellion to be a shade more dramatic. Had she acted too quickly? Probably, most likely. Did she regret it? No, nay, never, not a jot, said she. You try keeping your composure at seeing your perfect firstborn child carved like a pig and see how you feel. Still, her imprisonment had taught her patience beyond that of any saint. And from said patience she had listened to the fragments whisper, both of the state of the world, the lingering feelings of the greater will amid that sublime ordered grace of the golden order, and all that lay therein. Locked as it was beyond the borders of the greater cosmos, there was precious little the greater will could do save pass on its malignant will to the fingers and smolder impotently at how it could not change the damage she had dealt by shattering the Elden Ring. That thought, at least, brought her some small bit of pleasure, even in captivity. Oh, how her dark painted lips curled into an amused smile at the reminder. For a time, a terribly long time, she had believed that her hammer blow had yielded eons of annoyance upon the unfathomable patron she was still tied to. And then one day, everything changed. A curious tremor had rung through the Golden Order, the likes of which she could not place. An oddity that implied the unchanging will was trying something new. It had taken her the better part of a decade to interpret the meaning, to see the patterns and holes in the feelings and conceptual miasma until the reality of the matter set in. Now realization dawned. The greater will, intended to start anew. It had called forth a golden Elden star from the cosmos, sent it hurtling towards the lands between on tides of regression and causality, and with it someone? To replace the Elden beast. Had she been able to, Marika would have screamed. Alas, in her current state she could barely gasp. So that was its game. Summon something with the strength to rip the fragments of the ring from her body, then use the monstrous golden light to forge a new one, with new rules and realities of the world bereft of that which Marika deigned appealing and wondrous. It would be death. For her and everything she'd ever known. She'd raged against the horror of it all. When her mind and confined body finally settled, she began to think of ways to counteract this horrifying prospect, mustering her brilliant mind and boundless guile to set a countermeasure in place. While she tracked the golden star in her mind, Marika came to several conclusions about it, the ring and the lands between. Firstly was that for the awesome power she could sense, it was not omnipotent and thus surmountable. Secondly was that so long as the gossamer filaments of auric light and brilliant gold crisscrossed her body, the reality of the Elden Ring would hold, and this new beast could not simply will her away. And lastly, how curious! This new beast was not of the will's creation. Bound though her body was, her mind was not. She could see it had been plucked from the cosmos, not formed by it. Therefore it could be spoken with, reasoned with, turned in accordance with her will, and made to see reason. Yes, she rather liked the sound of that. Of course, to do that she would need an agent. But who? Who could she trust to not only understand her longing to turn this beast aside, but surmount it should they fail? The answer came in an epiphany so magnanimous that she nearly laughed herself silly. Who to send? Why, herself of course. Who better suited for such a task than one such as she? She was not completely impotent, bound as she was at the Erd Tree's heart by the confounded cosmic cretins' G's. Nay, her grace still touched the numerous tarnished and few lost souls that crossed the plains. After all, the Erd tree itself was at its heart, still a tree, all nurturing, all giving, life-bearing, and it was from this that she drew power. So it was that she mustered her might from the fragments of the ring still embedded in her breast. Radagon, traitorous other half of her soul that he was, squirmed in complaint within her. What heresy doth thou attempt now? Silence, leal hound. Marika silenced him with a snarl. She was not yet so weak as to be subsumed by him. Not now, not yet. Ignoring his complaints, she began the painstaking process. Crafting a body was the easiest place to start, growing it from within the glistening gilded bark of the Erd tree. In her mind's eye she felt this errant beast arrive and slowly traverse the lands, drawn unerringly towards the tree. Debating between martial prowess and divine miracle, the goddess chose a middle ground of her and Radagon. His strength and her shape, as she had been prior to ascending to true godhood. Was a small matter to ignore the small blight that ached from within the ring at a second artificially created union of the two halves of one being shearing a soul. From there she siphoned off a piece of herself, a fragment of her soul with a singular purpose and modus. She shaped it and gave it ego, that is to say, a sense of self, the better to drive away the golden beast and make it see sense. But she could already feel the new Elden star approaching, and the beast it carried within. She must hurry. With little in the way of time or resources, she'd hurriedly pushed it into the body and BRTH into the world at the foot of the Erd tree's gigantic buttress roots. A fragment of herself, yes, a little piece. There was just one tiny problem with said piece. In her haste, Marika made a blunder. She'd made it too small. Naruto was having something of an interesting week, to say the least. It had begun as many of his weeks tended to, sleeping in on Monday, followed by a late rise for brunch for which he had chosen to partake of in that most hallowed of establishments. After all, if ramen was the food of the gods, then surely Ikaraku's was their altar. So it had been with groggy eyes and a rumbling stomach that he'd stalked through the midday Konoha sunshine, traveling through long memorized streets towards his watering hole of choice. Despite the total rebuild that Konoha had undergone after the war, he could still implicitly find his way to the ramen bar with his eyes closed. Sounds simple so far. No, you be wrong. Which is why when he'd opened his eyes, he had been immensely surprised by the pillar of gilded light careening down upon him from the heavens. It all happened so quickly that even now he could scarcely recall most of the details. But what he did remember was a feeling of being plucked and dragged upwards at speeds that sent stars racing before his vision. It was only after the initially vertigo and confusion wore off that he realized the stars were quite literal indeed. For he'd found himself floating at the heart of an immense nebulae of brilliant stars and plumes of glittering golden dust arranged into ordered filaments and constellations. "A wanton heretic has broken my trust," a booming voice cried across the cosmos, echoing endlessly with no apparent source, no matter how Naruto owlishly looked around himself to find the speaker amidst the stars. "Order rots in the lands between, O Elden star that glints with life. A task for thee, and a boon." Naruto. He remembered that much. He also recalled letting out a somewhat undignified yelp when strings of light and gossamer bands of black-hued dust began to form around him, snapping taut around his body as they burned deeply. "Go then, Elden star," it had garbled at him, "fall upon a world gone mad and seekest the golden tree that stands as testament to the folly of hubristic gods. Teareth the Elden ring from mine digesting WHR and bring about a true golden order upon that which is so thoroughly beyond my plan." Without time to respond with more than a belated yelp, he'd found himself fired away from the golden constellation through a blur of bent prismatic light and fracturing reality as space bent in accordance to the will of the eldritch voice. Had he been able to speak in those scant moments, or realized that greater will had actually deigned to talk to him, a singular expletive-filled sentence would have ripped itself from his lungs. "I didn't understand a third of what the FCK you just said." What had followed was a PRD of tumbling through a kaleidoscopic hellscape of pulsing fractals and ambient pressure akin to attempting to headbutt your way through a Bajidama. An utterly insane prospect to anyone who kept some semblance of sanity in their life, but hardly in the top 30 weirdest events in Naruto's life. After all, he'd been tanking Bajidama since he turned 16. Really, he was more annoyed than anything when, with all the suddenness of a thunderclap, he found himself crashing headfirst into a fog-filled valley at terminal velocity and none of the mental faculties to abate his rapid descent. The splat he had made hitting the floor was hardly what he would call dignified. Thankfully, no one was present to witness it, and the immediate aftermath of his arrival had been focused entirely on coming to terms with the reality of what he had been through. To summarize, he was having a bad time. A lengthy argument with Kurama had ensured that after a fair amount of childish bickering over what, exactly, this bloody golden voice had actually said, they at least knew one thing. The most useful bit of info that they could agree on was that the destination of the quest they had been volunteered into was a golden tree. Thus, they'd set out to find it to get this whole annoying situation put to bed and go home, preferably before Ikaraku's closed for the evening. It had not taken them very long to catch a glimpse of said prodigal oak, a towering trunk of spun sunlight in the form of a tree, splitting the horizon for all to see from hundreds of leagues around. Naruto's blonde brow had furrowed at the sight of it for two reasons. The first being that the sheer size of it made it strong to gauge its distance from them. It could have been the next valley over, or it could be a country away. It was impossible to tell. The second was far more personal and infinitely more mundane. He'd thought there'd be some grand quest to find it, but nope. There it was, looming in the distance. That's weirdly anticlimactic, he'd thought to himself at the time. In the week that followed, he'd slowly but surely begun the long trek towards the obvious endpoint of his journey. As he did, he'd taken time to learn the nature of the realm known as the Lands Between and its numerous oddities. After a week's travel on swift feet through forests, villages, and the myriad environs between him and what he now knew to be called the Erd Tree, he'd had ample time begun to think. While Kurama was eventually able to translate the needlessly archaic manner of speech in which this golden voice had spoken into something they understood, Naruto found himself left with far more questions now than answers. What was the Elden Ring? What was this divine folly he was supposed to uproot? Was there any chance that doing what he had been ordered to do would mean he would go home? Somehow, I doubt it. Damn it, I'm really not fond of these faceless god types. The blonde thought, looking up at the wide trunk of the Erd Tree before leaping from another rooftop in a deft jump that carried him through the air as if in flight. A few hours later, he had made it to the roots of the mighty gilded oak, feeling its light trickle down onto him like so much summer sun. At last, his journey had come to an end. He smiled softly to himself. Said smile faded to a thoughtful frown as something began to niggle at his senses. An odd call that came not from the eerie deified nature within the tree, but something near its roots. Taking a detour into the shadow of one such root, the Uzumaki found himself enveloped in a thick fog, welling up from the flower-covered meadow that grew in the light of the Erd Tree, walking through a strange soup of gold mist as he followed the call. It was a trifling thing, sad and confused, yet brilliantly vivid regardless of how small, a bright light sadly twinkling amidst a cosmos of nature that the Erd Tree and its light was to his sage senses. Careful, Kurama cautioned. It's not the first time this place's trickery has nearly put one over on us so far. Naruto grimaced at the reminder. Yeah, Caelid ain't a place I ever want to go back to, but knowing our luck, we're probably gonna get drawn back there eventually. Just thinking of it made him grumble, and casting a glance to his bare feet. Soft white flowers parted before his toes beneath under the fog. The scarlet rot had taken his favorite pair of sandals, and he'd been stumbling around on aching feet ever since. All because he'd taken the advice of a certain bald merchant who advised cutting through Caelid to expedite his path to the plateau. If I see Patches again, I swear to the log I'm gonna kick him off a cliff. Kurama quirked an eyebrow. That's an oddly specific punishment, there. And here I'd thought you'd just kick the CRP out of him and be on your way. Shaking his head, Naruto gave an amused smile. For some reason the thought of pushing that chrome dome off a high place feels strangely fitting. Can't say why, but I guess we'll get an answer when we meet again. He made to say more before he caught a sound, muffled by the fog. He listened for a few seconds before realizing what it was. Is that? Naruto hummed in thought, opening his senses to the world and letting his awareness expand over the area. Blue eyes shimmered into gold. As far as he could discern, there was nothing to worry about, nothing hidden or obscured save for an acute awareness of being watched. That came from within the tree itself. Yet while it watched him, seemed to hold no ill intent. Which begged the question. What was going on here? He followed his senses through the fog until, finally, it began to thin. Gradually he discerned a shape in the distance, a small figure hunched the ground that, and with sight came sound. He heard, crying. No, that was too tame a word. Someone was bawling their eyes out, emitting tiny confused moans and groans. Approaching slowly, the fog layer broke away from his vision to reveal a circular flower bed of golden tulips swayed lightly in a faint breeze under the erd tree root. And there, at the center of the flower bed, he was surprised to see a child, no older than 3. As Naruto slowly drew closer, he realized she was a tiny thing indeed. A little girl clad in a simple gray gown with a mop of finely detailed red hair. She didn't even come up to his waist. In fact, she didn't seem to be aware of her surroundings at all, hands sweeping at her eyes as she bawled. There was a range of things that Naruto could have done in that instant. He could have checked the surrounding area for traps, just to make sure that there was nothing untoward at play here. Conversely, he could have taken advice from Kurama on how to approach. He could have sent a shadow clone in, just to be safe. Alas, all these approaches banked on a rational and predictable individual. Anyone who had spent more than an hour with him would gawp incredulously at the implication. So it was with no hesitation that Naruto unzipped his jacket, took it off, approached the little crying redhead, and wrapped it around her shoulders. The little girl stiffened in response to his touch. He felt the fear emanating from her. His concern deepened yet further. "Hey there, what's wrong?" he asked in a hushed tone. "Why you crying?" With faltering movements, the little girl pulled her hands from her face to look up at the young man, revealing a sweet face akin to a cherub with puffy eyes. Strangely enough, her right eye was a rich hazel, slightly reddened from much crying. And yet, though the left one was kept closed somehow, it remained tightly screwed shut in that way only a distressed child can manage. Seeing him now, her lone open eye widened in familiarity before confusion joined the potent emotions coursing through her. She tilted her little head to the side to stare at him. He wasn't surprised. He looked a mess. Now that he donated his jacket to give the little girl to give some semblance of warmth, he was left in little than his trousers and a frayed, bloody t-shirt. Her eye strayed to the marking on his chest, trying to make sense of it, and the markings left there by the golden voice. Well, good luck with that. He didn't know much about it himself. "You lost too, kiddo?" He gazed out into the fog, struggling to make sense of it all. "Wonder where your mom and dad are. What kind of parent leaves a crying kid at the foot of a tree?" The little girl looked up at him, her mind a blank canvas as she tried to interpret the cavalcade of feelings that the young man emitted. A feeling of tranquil calm and safety wafted from his presence. There was something about him, a golden light she could perceive beyond true sight, that warmed every fiber of her little body. It reminded her of someone, but she could not place who. For the foggy memories of golden light at the beginning of her existence were as abstract as the fog that surrounded them now. Yet there was something concise amidst the vagaries, something she had to do. This young man was special, and she was supposed to keep him close. Wasn't she? Her head hurt. Oi. For the eldritch forces observing them from within and without, the outcome should have been a rational one. It was not. A child's mind is a wonderful thing. As such, they could not begin to fathom just how simply yet spectacularly she would resolve the paradox. Nodding her head once, dark shroud of hair jostling about her face, the little girl decided exactly what Naruto meant to her. A tiny hand tugged at his sleeve. Once, twice, thrice. Pa. Naruto blinked, still looking out into the fog. She pointed at him, grinning. Papa. Kurama absolutely howled with laughter in his head. Naruto's head whipped around with an audible crack. Pa? No. We are not doing this SHT. I ain't your dad. I'm too young for that. The little girl touched a finger to her lips. Kurama's laughter redoubled. Her single hazel eye clouded in curiosity. SHT? She said innocently, the profanity fouling the air around the innocent cinnamon roll. Crud? Yeah, that's child-friendly. He waved his arms around in an attempt to swat the curse word from the fouled air. You're a little too young to be saying that word, she giggled, and he blinked, clapping his hands to either side of his head. And stop that. I'm too young to be a papa. SHT, she replied happily. Kurama kicked inside the seal, tails thrashing as he cackled. Naruto groaned. You're not going to forget that word, are ya? Not a chance. The little girl giggled and clapped her hands. SHT. Great. Not even a minute in, and I'm already a failure as a father. No, he rallied himself. Focus, damn it. I ain't a dad. Much to his chagrin, the child toddler soon presented him with another dial nut. As he looked on aghast, she began to make pleading noises, hopping up and down in place. Slender arms reached for him, her little dress flapping with every hop, his black jacket wrapped around her shoulders like a cloak. Her intentions were all too clear, even if she couldn't quite find the words for it. Little one wanted up. "Oi," he scowled. "Will you listen to me? I'm not." She flinched and whimpered, one hazel eye shining with tears. Idly, he noted the other was sealed with a black mark of some sort. Uh-oh. He knew that look far too well, having seen it a time or two. Surely she was gonna. The child warbled once, threw her head back, and wailed. His heart twisted at the sound. "Calm down, I'm not your—" "No," she bawled even louder. "Papa is Papa," she exclaimed it as though it were an immutable fact of the world. "Nobody else is Papa." Naruto heard the distinct sound of Kurama slipping over in laughter from inside his mind, and sent a flurry of blue language internally at the Biju, unintentionally ignoring the toddler that gestured for him. "Oh man," she was crying louder now, DEFCON 5. "Hey, don't cry. Oh, geez, all right. He knelt and took the little brunette into his arms. "I've got you. You're okay. What's your name?" The little girl sniffled into his arms and nestled her head into his chest, seeking shelter. "Melina." "Melina, eh? That's a pretty name, H. You're all right. Let's find your mama, eh?" She hiccuped once and clung to him for dear life. No prying her away now. Still, what manner of mother abandoned a little girl like this? Turning on his heel, Naruto cast a baleful look up at the great Erd tree and shook his head. He could feel it tugging at him, calling to him. Giant transcendental quests from possible ne'er-do-well deities could wait. What mattered right now was a young girl nestled against his chest for comfort. He'd be DMN if he didn't see her safe. "Right," he muttered. "I'll deal with this twiggy tree thing later. Guess we need to find you a change of clothes." His piece said, he tucked little Melina close to him and returned to the fog, walking away from the Erd tree with very little intention of heading back until the girl was quite safe. Perhaps, had he been in six-path sage mode, he might have caught the distinct sound of the golden voice raging impotently into the dark. That, or perhaps Queen Marika the eternal sputtering incoherently at how the so-called second Elton beast walked away with her aspect bundled up like a fresh-born babe. In a grand game of gods, none could hope to control a paragon of unpredictability, nor a freshly born child's longing for a parent. Far beyond the stars in the heart of its cosmos, the greater will seethed. Its constellation of perfectly arrayed stars flashed with furious fire, boiling in the void. Were it not for that despicable radon holding back the stars, it would happily rain solar hellfire down upon the world that defied it. But it couldn't. So long as he willed, it could not act overtly. Only subtly. Curse Marika and her hastily created child. Blast the child for leading its second beast astray. Confound the beast for making pretend he was a man. I shall do unto you a travesty, beast, and when your falsehoods of civility are but ash in your mouth, you will burn this world clean in your wrath. The answer was simple. This child must die. It still had minions in the lands between. All would proceed apace. Bouncy! Hey, careful up there. Melina, as Naruto soon learned, was an energetic child. Very energetic indeed. Even now she giggled as she swayed to and fro on his shoulders, gripping onto his hair for dear life, while he ran full tilt across the waist. He craned his back to look at her for a moment and was rewarded with a cherubic grin. She kicked the back of her legs against his chest, trying to spur him on. Almost tickled, really. "Enjoying that, are you?" She grinned down at him, lone eye sparkling with glee, hair bobbing in the wind. "Yes." Always one for short sentences, this one. Then again, she was a child after all. Faster, Papa, faster. His heart, pure child. Must protect this one at all costs. Faster it was, then. A seamster he most assuredly was not. But he'd managed to fashion a crude sling of sorts for the girl to rest in while he ran. She'd had a short nap in it some time ago, woken up, then promptly clambered onto his back for a piggyback ride instead. How she'd managed to cling on this long, he had no idea. He wasn't about to look a gift horse in the mouth. Girl had a good grip on his hair. Better to have her close than where someone might snatch her. There had been more than a few attempts from the monsters in these parts already. As for him, he didn't really know where to go, but he'd let his legs lead the way. Hadn't failed him thus far. Likewise, he had no idea he'd wandered into Liurnia of the Lakes. There was no need to hold back now for fear of missing anything. He ran full tilt, determined to put as much distance between him and that weird tree as possible. His feet carried him back the way he'd come, away from the capital and that cranky old curmudgeon with his cane. Yup, skipped right over that ornery bstrd. He'd deal with him sooner or later, or never, hadn't decided yet. So, he slowed to a jog and risked a glance up at his young ward. Where you want to go next? Melina pursed lips, little face scrunching up in thought. Her good eye looked across the horizon, settled upon something. She moved a finger forth. Castle. What, that? Naruto followed her gaze. There was indeed a castle-like structure looming in the distance, easily visible against the fading light. You think your mama's there? Her head bobbed. Worked for him. For now, he wasn't in any hurry to pick a fight, not with a little one to look after. Please. A sudden voice startled him. That girl is the hope of this world. Cherish her. Strange. Kurama? You say something? Don't look at me. Fia. Eh? Naruto craned his neck and found Melina pointing at something over the tree line near the lake. A plume of smoke drew his eyes, carrying a faint scent on the wind against the setting sun. He hadn't a clue what it might be, but whatever it was, it smelled absolutely appetizing, made his gut twist into knots. When was the last time he'd eaten something? Never mind that, when had Melina? His stomach growled anew. Melina made a plaintive noise and clutched at her own tummy. Neither of them had a thing to eat in the last 6 hours. Civilization. Hopefully they have some food. Guess the castle could wait. Renala sneezed. How curious indeed. Is someone speaking of me? Big Bogard was nobody's fool. A blackguard he may well be, but not a stupid one. In fact, he considered himself a right reasonable fellow. He knew when to pick a fight and when to walk away, when to stand his ground and act tough, and of course when to not mess with a bloke. There were certain folks you just didn't much about with, like that bloody dung-eater, or the blonde, blue-eyed bstrd marching toward him. Once more, Bogard was no fool. Anyone traveling about in these troubled times was either a madman or a fighter. This one, wading through the shallows toward his humble shack, looked very much like the latter. Even if he did have a kid riding on his shoulders, rare, that. He didn't see many traveling with children. Not these days, not merchants, tarnished or otherwise. Almost made him smile, it did. Almost. Unfortunately, the bugger was headed right his way and didn't seem keen on slowing down. Hey, there, he waved a tattered sleeve in his direction. We saw your fire. Any chance you got room for 2 more? Bogart puffed up his chest. What are you looking at? He glared the pair's way. You trying to start something, mate? Nothing at all. The blonde flashed him a disarming grin and paused some distance away. Just wondering if you wouldn't mind a little company tonight. Bogart very much would, but somehow he doubted this bloke would take no for an answer. What are you doing with a little un? He said instead. This ain't no place for a child. The runt was eyeing his pot of prawn too, a finger to her lips. He had half a mind to smack her hand away if she made a grab for them. Half a mind. Not a whole mind. Poor kid looked like she was starving, and the blonde wasn't much better off. It didn't help when she whimpered. Hungry. Blast his bleeding heart. All right, toss me some runes and you can share me fire. And don't try nothing either, couldn't be too careful with lot like this about. He might have friends waiting in the trees after all. Make any funny moves and I'll bash your skull. Much to his surprise, the blonde did, in fact, have runes. A great number of them. More than enough to pay his way forward. Bogart accepted them happily. You're a shrewd one, mate. Still, you sure it's a good idea to be prancing about with a tyke? The blonde's affable smile withered away. She stays with me. Nope, nope, nope. Not going near that minefield. Your bloody idea, mate. Don't come crying to me later if she gets lost. She got a name? Melina. The girl waved. Ha. Fancy? And you? Naruto. A hint of his old smile returned. And you are? Blast. Well, nothing ventured, nothing gained, he supposed. Name's Bogart. Braggart? He scowled. Bogart. All right, wasn't trying to be rude. Still the blonde lingered, not willing to approach. He let the little lass clamber off his back, but she didn't stray far from his side. Her lone eye regarded him with naked curiosity, considering him as one might an interesting animal. Bogart found he didn't much like that either. Almost felt if someone were watching him through this little lass, observing him, judging him. You would be correct. A voice like warm honey trickled into his ear. Thou shalt these two the shelter they seek, or I shall be most displeased. A cold shiver shot down his spine. Marika's melons, that almost sounded like the queen herself. Maybe I've had a bit too much prawn today. Oh, PSS off. Bogart's nerves couldn't take any more of this stress. What is it now? Why you looking at me like that? The girl Melina touched a finger to her lips, and like any child, repeated what she'd just heard. PSS. Naruto's face turned thunderous. Wanna run that by me again? Sorry, he held up a gloved hand to stave him off. You want some of me prawn, missy? Freshly cooked it is. She scampered forward as he offered up her prize. Here, hold out your palms. I'll give ye some. Melina held up her hands eagerly. All right, then, here. He ladled it atop her fingers. It's yours. Careful now, it's hot. K. Her head bobbed, and she granted him a grin. Thank you, quick as can be. She took a bite. Her entire body went still. Then her eye lit up. A second bite followed the first as she squealed happily. It's good. Naruto tapped the back of her head with one finger. Don't talk with your mouth full. I'm sorry. Adorable little lass. Bogart could see why the blonde was so keen on protecting her. You look like you've got plenty of runes on ye. He turned his gaze on her minder in turn as Melina dug into her meal. I could be persuaded to sell you some other bits too, if you like. A blonde brow rose. How much would staying the night cost? In 100 runes? Bloody bleeding heart he was, making it that cheap. Naruto forked it over, shouldered his pack, and plonked down on a hickory stump beside him. You're tarnished, ain't ya? No? A frown touched Bogart's face beneath the mask when the blonde frowned at him. Can't you see it then? The guidance of grace, I mean? His frown deepened. No idea what you're talking about. I can't see it at all no more myself. Makes no bloody sense anyway. Why, some no-name shilly idiot. Bogart corrected himself quickly when Melina looked up from her meal, looking fit to repeat that particular word and land him a heap of trouble. Like me should get called to the lands between. Cruel bloody joke, you ask me. He was jabbering now, he knew, trying to keep him distracted, keep him from stoving his head in. Maybe something when Melon's up with it. Maybe ... it's been broke for a good long, while the Erd tree, I'm sayin'. That's what it's called, the big tree. Bogart barked a laugh and offered him some prawn. You been livin' under a rock, mate? Nah, Naruto bit into it, swallowed, then flashed him a grin. Got kidnapped by some star thingy and fell out of the sky. Star what now? Confusion rattled him. You're having me on. The warrior shook his head and bit into another piece of prawn. Really wish I was. He could see through the bloke's shirt, the myriad of runes etched into his skin. When the blonde bent over to take another bite, so too was Bogart granted another glimpse. They were all over his chest, stretching near toward his back. Didn't rightly know where those came from. They weren't any of the great runes those bleedin' demigods had. So whose were they? Wait, star, he'd said. Fallen out the sky, he said. Bogart felt his very soul clench. Had the greater will snatched this one up, carved runes into him, and flung him down here? Nope. Way above his pay grade. Don't think about it. Ignorance was bliss. Fair enough, he said at length. Never met someone with a taste for prawn I couldn't trust. We'd make good mates, I reckon. He flicked a gaze to Melina, absently handed the little lass more prawn when she asked, then eyed the dwindling prawn in his pot. Supplies were running low. He'd plenty of food for himself, mind, but he hadn't expected guests tonight, and it showed. Tell you what, you look like you can handle yourself. Bring me one of those giant lobsters, and you'll have your fill of prawn for life. On the house. Naruto perked up. No strings attached? Nope. I'm a man of me word. Deal. Blade gawped openly at what he was seeing, his maw wide and tongue lolling before lifting the binoculars to his face again. There it was again, The sight that had continued to baffle him for the past 10 minutes since he had spotted the dot on the waterlogged horizon. A young blonde tarnished, riding on the back of a giant crayfish with a small red head on his shoulder. He chuffed at the absurdity of it and couldn't help but peel back his lips in a lupine grin. My, you seem like quite the amusing fellow. Randy must be told of this. Bloody hell, you actually did it. Is that doubt I detect? No, not at all. Bogart cursed himself for the slip and waved his hands quickly to stave off Naruto's scowl. Never before had he been more grateful for his iron mask. It hid the complete and utter gobsmacked expression he wore as the whiskered warrior dropped not one, not two, but 3 lobsters' corpses before him, and he was still riding a fourth like it was a horse or something. Blasted blonde BSTRD. He didn't have so much a scratch on him. Neither did his kid, still snug as a bug in a rug in that sling of hers. What kind of strength did it take to wrangle that many monsters and come away unscathed? He didn't want to know. You wanted one, but we stumbled into these 2 on the way back. Naruto hopped down off his chosen mount, letting it gurgle angrily. Said gurgle stopped abruptly as Melina ran a hand over his claw. Hope you don't mind? Mind? Like hell I do. There was enough here to feed me for months. A tiny hand tugged at his sleeve. Belatedly, he realized Melina had squirmed free from her sling when he wasn't looking. Now she was gazing at him intently. Big Bogart frowned down at her, not sure what to make of her expression. What? Why you looking at me like that? Melina wrinkled her nose, beamed, now, and then. Will the food be ready soon, uncle? Naruto pitched back with a cackle. Bogart absolutely wheezed. Cute little runt. Even in sleep she was just too pure. How anyone could say no to her was beyond him. Not bloody fair. How the blonde bloke was rearing something I like that baffled him. There were monsters and demigods and goddess knew what else about. Yet here he was trekking about with a tyke. Well, ladies did love children. Was that it, then? Maybe this was some kind of gimmick to gain maidens or something. And that bloody blonde was still laughing. Laugh it up, you. Hurry up and help me crack these shells open. We can cook 'em right up. Several hours of work later saw the 2 of them digging into an overflowing pot of prawn, the sun creeping low in the sky once more. So you're headed north, then? He frowned behind his mask. If it's knowledge you're after, then that academy would be the best place to look. Naruto looked up from his meal. Academy? Bogart jerked a thumb over his shoulder to Rhea Lucaria. You really were living under a rock, weren't ya? A blonde brow rose. Right. Almost forgot who this bloke was. As if he needed a reminder. Are you going to stay here? He knew a choice lay before him. If he had half a lick of sense, he'd tell this blonde BSTRD to sod off right now. Only proper, that sticking with him was bound to bring a whole heap of trouble. Really, what did he stand to gain from any of this? Nothing. Might be best just to bugger off when he wasn't looking and head somewhere else. The lands between were vast. Surely there had to be a place for him to hide. Not like he could track him down all the way out in the boonies anyway. Or he could help him. Aid him in his quest to do whatever the hell he was doing. Me? A hero? PSS on that. It wasn't even something he set out malice. If anything, he pitied the poor bloke. Didn't seem to know a DMN thing about the lands between. He wasn't going to get far like that. Someone had to fill him in one way or the other. Might as well be him. Who knew? Maybe with a friend like that, he might actually be able to. Nah. It was just that, a pipe dream. Even so, he found he wanted to try. I'll catch up to ya when I'm done here. Might head over to the Altus Plateau after. I'm sure the kid won't mind. SHHH. Naruto held up a finger and hissed softly. She's sleeping. Bogart craned his neck over, just to be certain she was safe. She was, but, albeit not at all as he expected. Sure enough, little Melina lay tucked against Naruto's lobster steed, sound asleep. The crustacean had curled around her akin to a cat, shielding her with a broken pincer. Huh. Bogart chortled softly. Would you look at that? Melina dreamed. There was a light in her mind, a strange glimmering golden shiny thing that filled her world, burned the darkness away. It felt warm, it felt good, safe. Almost like Papa, but different. The light didn't burn. It wrapped itself around her like a nice comfy blanket and held her close, humming a haunting melody she couldn't quite remember. But she couldn't keep her eye closed forever. Eventually she had to open it. And so she saw. A appealing lady wrapped in stood in the center of it, her eyes sharp, hair spun from gold. She felt familiar. Where had she seen her before? At last. The woman flung her arms up with a frustrated try. "You're finally asleep. I've been trying to contact you all this time." Little Melina tilted her head at her, tilted it some more now, frowned. Aha, she knew though this was, it all made sense now. She moved a finger at her. "Mama." The woman jolted. "Pardon?" Melina didn't budge. "Yes, well," the strange lady coughed into a fist and looked aside. Why was her face red? I suppose I did create you. T would be remiss of you not to call me such, I suppose." Big words, didn't make any sense. She lifted her arms, trying to confirm her suspicions. If she really was her mama. Up? "Very well." The woman crouched down. "Come here, fragment. Let me have a look at you." She scooted closer. "What's a fragment?" "It is what you are, child." The strange lady took her into her arms and lifted her up, holding her close, allowing her to look up at her. "You are a piece of me, albeit smaller than I intended. Nothing to be done about it now, I suppose." Yay, she'd been right all along. She had a mama, even if she did speak funny. "Listen to me, little one." The woman spoke again before her thoughts could run away with her. "Our time here is short. I can only speak to thee in thine dreams, and I have used much of my strength to reach thee at this distance. I shan't be able to do so again for quite some time." Ah, that made her sad. "You're going away already." "Only for a little while." She embraced her forehead. It made Melina feel all warm and fuzzy. "You shall see me again, but listen. You need to keep the new beast away from the tree, child." "Beast? Who was a beast?" "Why?" "Because the tree is bad." "Okay?" "Good." She booped her nose. "And don't call that oaf papa. You come from finer stock than he." Anger sparked. Her brow furrowed. "No." The woman recoiled. "Now see here." "No," she stomped a foot. "Papa is papa." "Peace." The golden lady held up a hand. "The situation may be tenuous, but it can yet be salvaged." Melina growled angrily. "Stubborn child," her mama growled right back. "You truly are a piece of me. So be it. Call him papa if you wish. 'Tis clear I cannot dissuade you from your chosen course." Melina tilted her head, not comprehending a bit of that. "You talk funny." "You didn't understand any of that, did you?" A shake of the head. "Listen." She held her up to eye level, pressing her forehead to hers. "Tree is bad. Do you understand? Under no circumstances are you to let him inside. Are we clear?" Melina nodded, comprehending that at least. "Tree is bad. Keep papa away from it." "Okay, I can do that." "Good girl. Shall I hold you a while until you wake? It has been some time since I held any of my children." She drifted off once more to the faint sound of singing. The greater will acted. Such was its namesake, its very reason for being. It was not called the middling will, and certainly not the lesser will. Nay, it was greater, superior, such was in its name. And for such heresy, it would use all the mans at its disposal, every pawn it could. The two fingers received its command, those who yet remained. The child must be hunted down and slain. The hunt began. Now. Awaken. Millicent opened her eyes. She found herself staring into a starry cosmos. Where was she? She remembered lying in the cathedral, slowly crumbling away. But now, child of rot. The greater will leer down at her. You shall do my bidding. In turn, I grant thee a boon. Naruto glared at Academy guards. To be fair, they didn't glare back. Why would they, when they weren't even aware of him anymore? They thought he'd fled after his first attempt to breach the gate. Gone running when it became clear that no amount of words or negotiation would possibly sway them. He doubled back to a distance instead, gauging his options. Well, what few there were. He'd expected some form of resistance. But this bordered on absurd. All well and good, but he had Melina and her sling, and he really didn't want to expose her to this. The defenders would let none pass were determined to give their lives in defense of the gate. Nothing less than complete and utter annihilation, perhaps not even that, would keep them from fulfilling their duty. Running past them was certainly an option, but he didn't like the idea of having them at his back. Nor was stealth an option. He'd already gone that route. He couldn't even knock them out because they seemed to be under a spell of some sort, one that forced them back to wakefulness the moment he sent them under. But to just kill them because they were in his way, well, that didn't sit right with him, you know? Then settle for half measures? As ever, Kurama came up with a solution before he could. Blitz them. Break their arms and legs. They'll be angry, but they won't be able to chase you. You can always heal them later. Sounds fair to me? With a sigh, he turned to look down as his ward. Melina, cover your ears and close your eyes. Keep them that way until I tap your forehead. Yes, Papa. She did so with a chagrined chirrup. He bound her tightly to his back, making certain she was safe in her HRNSS. From there, he adopted a runner's crouch, hands to the floor, one leg pushed back against a crumbling wall. It would do. His body blazed gold. Eldritch black marks scrawled across his body, causing his back and chest the runes carved within to itch. This felt like overkill. It undoubtedly. The guardians of the gate weren't even remotely prepared for what was coming. On my mark. Ready? Naruto felt his eyes flash red. Set. They burst forward in a singular flash. Go. To call what followed a fight would have been generous. He was not. It was a slaughter. They didn't see him coming, didn't even know he was there, until he landed among them. Blows flew. Bones snapped loudly. Bodies hit the floor. Naruto closed his ears to the screams that followed. He was the light, and the light mowed down to those who barred its path. Almost before he knew it, the deed was done. They didn't even last 10 seconds. And yet, for all that, not a single soul perished. Everyone survived, though some might wish they hadn't. Well, all right then, he clapped his hands, surveying the groaning bodies before him. Let that be a lesson to you. Anyone want to get up? A chorus of groans and curses greeted him. Still, he could have sworn he'd forgotten something. Oh, right. He tapped Melina's forehead. You can look, now. Melina creaked an eye open. Balked now, at the bodies sprawling the floor, he winced, expecting shock. Fear, at the very least. Papa's amazing. Ha! He thumbed his nose, silently glad he'd spared her the sight of such carnage. If you say so. Satisfied with his handiwork, he turned. In sparing the defenders, he unwittingly created a new legend. But that is a story for another time. Before long, he reached the gate proper. There too, he found his path barred, not by might of men but magic. Sealed by a mighty blue barrier that loomed large over the academy, there was no hope of egress. He couldn't even risk smashing through it, for fear of what might happen to the academy within. The whole place might collapse, and then where would he be? No, this required a more delicate touch. With a long-suffering sigh, he sat down and delved into his supplies. Bogart had all sorts of odds and ends for sale. He'd bought them all. Cleaned him right out. Now he drew forth a large brush and a pot of ink, sat down, spread a scroll before him, dipped the brush into a pot. All right, time to see if this whole Uzumaki sealing business is hereditary or self-taught. He hoped it was the former. If not, they were going to be here a while. Naruto heaved a sigh. Might want to get comfortable, Mel. His daughter plonked down beside him. MK. Something had changed. Renala raised her head. She felt a ripple in the pond of her mind. It seemed strange to say after so long a time, but there it was. With each passing hour she felt her thoughts returning, sharpening, regaining their former luster. It wasn't an immediate thing rather, but the result of a great deal of time. A curious lessening in her thoughts, as though a pressure were being eased from her skull, poison leached from a wound. She could sense a looming presence nearby. Powerful, yet its proximity brought her peace. The closer it came, the more herself she became. Curious. It wasn't something she wanted. Not at first. Ignorance was bliss. There was peace in madness, serenity in insanity. But she had no say in the matter. Eventually she sensed the strength of runes themselves. That familiar burning beacon she'd learned to recognize long ago. Not just any runes, but great runes, a presence growing stronger with each passing moment. And with it, the final fetters fell from her mind. At last she looked about, her mind her own once more. What she beheld caused her stomach to sink. She saw her sweetings crawling upon the ground, and for the first time, felt not love, but horror. These were not her dear daughter. These were abominations. Awful legless things made in her madness. In grief-filled sorrow, they looked upon her with dark eyes. Broken little dolls. Rennala recoiled. "I am sorry, my dear." She closed her eyes and raised a hand. "I have to go, now." She had created these poor souls through the forbidden rite of rebirth. It was the work of moments to end them. With not a clenching of her finger, she undid the horror she'd made. As one they turned to dust. Nary a sound was made in their passing. Empty robes fluttered to the floor, leaving their candlesticks to fall atop them. Rennala dropped her amber egg, picked up her staff, walked over their remains, and did not look back. There was work to do. She knew not how long this brief pang of sanity might last, only that she must make use of it while she could. The past tugged at her, old memories made manifest once more. She saw ghosts in the halls, specters of her family, happier times rising to haunt her. She grit her teeth against it and kept walking. Her heart hurt. Reidagon. It was all his fault. He would pay for this. She would have recompense. Down through the academy she went, taking the secret paths to avoid the scholars. None challenged her. Perhaps they knew better. Soon enough, she reached the lecture hall. It was there that she found him. A great beast barred her path, a red-cloaked creature with tooth and claw. She knew at a glance the red wolf of Reidagon, her husband's once beloved pet. It growled at her now, gone feral in the absence of its MSTR. Poor creature. It, at least, was blameless in her husband's deceit. She didn't miss the bodies of several scholars strewn about at its feet. Rennala felt no pity for them, half-eaten as they were. The fools had earned what they wrought, but Omathiulf was looking with her angry. "Dost thou not recognize me?" she called out to it. "You were but a pup whence I saw thee last." Apparently not. It bared its fangs at her, hackles rising in angry defiance. Rennala's staff tapped down. She whispered a familiar cantrip under her breath, one known only to the royal family. The wolf paused, having been trained to recognize such since its earliest days. Its tail twitched. Rennala hummed. "Knoweth me now." It was like flicking a SWCH. A happy yip, and then it was upon her. The wolf lunged, but not to attack. Its body struck hers at speed, forcing Rennala to catch the beast to be pushed down to the ground. Even then it was a near thing. Heavy red paws planted on her shoulders in its haste to get at her, and that was it. A rough tongue licked her face, causing her to sputter and fend it off. "I'm happy to see you too, old friend." She laughed. "Let us pay our guest a visit, shall we?" Naruto leaned back with a hearty sigh. He'd done it. Well, it looked like he had. Maybe. Hopefully. Hours upon hours of work, pieced together by nothing more than Kurama's advice and his own instinct. Either this would work, or well, maybe blow up in his face. Still, nothing ventured, nothing gained. He raised a hand toward the barrier. It fizzled before his very eyes. He hadn't done a DMN thing. What? As he looked on aghast, the gate opened. A tall woman stepped forth, clad in dark robes. Bright eyes gleamed at him from a dangerous visage. Her eyes sharp, face framed by long midnight black hair cascading down her back. A great red beast loped behind her with cautious steps, considering them keenly. All of this was lost on him a moment later as the woman in question spoke. "Who are you, good sir?" "Who am I?" His right eye twitched. "Who are you? You ruined all my strong work." Melina's reaction proved more poignant. "Doggy." She all but buried her head deep into the russet red fur of the large wolf, little arms and legs clamping her to it like a limpet as she squealed in mirth. The red wolf loosed a happy bark and nosed her face. She latched on even harder, running her hands over its shaggy coat as she babbled like the child she was. The tension shattered. "Sorry," Naruto dragged the word out in embarrassment, sending an apologetic look at their host. "Melina is kinda fond of animals." "Hush, traveler, 'tis not a problem," the woman laughed, a refined bell-like sound that tinkled the air. "There is no greater joy than witnessing the happiness of a sweeting, no?" Naruto smiled softly. No words needed to be said. If he knew what was to come, he might have said otherwise. Dawn came like a fitful child. As the sun slowly rose to its zenith in the sky, Liurnia's usual light drizzle was broken for the first time in several days in favor of a clear horizon. And for once, warm weather could be appreciated from the usually drafty academy. A cool mist rose from waterlogged surroundings to waft lethargically over the surface of lakes that seemed determined to swallow up the academy grounds and give it an ostentatiously large moat. It wasn't something that bothered Naruto all that much. In fact, for the first time in several weeks, Naruto felt himself approaching something that might have been called serene. The blonde's look had changed slightly since his lodging in Rhea Lucaria had begun, now sporting a somewhat plush midnight blue doublet that he had, liberated from one of the now long-defunct dormitories. Its body was festooned with light blue filigree and the straps that might have once attached a scholarly mantle. Naruto and Kurama had collectively sighed in relief at being able to find warm and clean clothes preserved by some kind of spell woven into the storage trunks. Really glad I found the sandals. Weird to think that there are samurai in this land, though the former mused, looking at the tips of his toes wiggling out from the ends of open-toed sandals. Don't get me wrong, boots are nice for the cold, but 20 years of sandals makes you appreciate free toes. In the days that had passed since their odd group's arrival, there had been a number of curious changes to the usual dynamic of moving from one place to another, and their new host was more than happy to offer room and board on the academy grounds. Indeed, Rennala had been a gracious host, even if it was clear that she was used to being the one served as opposed to serving. In return, she'd only asked two things as payment for their lodging. Tell me, how hath the world changed in my absence? Talk to me. It has been far too long since I have heard voices other than my own. She had said to them all in a quiet voice, watching fondly as Melina rolled around with the great red wolf in front of the fire. While Naruto had not been in the position to fill in the blanks for the full moon queen, he had been caught by just how vulnerable she sounded. Her appealing face was porcelain white from years, nay, decades, in some dusty library. Her new hope was new and tender as a green shoot poking from winter's strong ground. Bogart, bless the big iron-masked softy, had stepped in then, doing the lion's share of the explanation, his voice carrying a cadence that indicated he was stunned to be in the presence of some mythical figure. At the end of the explanation that had lasted an entire night, Rennala had put her head in her hands and let her shoulders slump, her visible skin luminous in the gloom of the room, the fire having long burned down to embers. Before Naruto could extend a hand in comfort and ask what was wrong, she had straightened and graced them with a queenly nod. She thanked them for their words and gave them leave to remain in the academy as long as they pleased. Naruto smiled softly, turning a corner towards the central annex to take in the midday glory. It hadn't stopped him and Bogart from making themselves useful. A chime of sound and scream of danger was all the warning Naruto needed to lazily tilt his head to the side. A blue-white streak of magic went sailing past his ear to slam into one of the stone pillars, glittering crystal briefly manifesting from the point of impact. Speaking of making myself useful, he uttered, turning on his heel and launching himself towards the shadow where the glintstone magic had come. The Uzumaki's hands locked around the lapels of the interloper and roughly dragged them into the hall to toss them against the stone-flagged floor. A muffled grunt of pain emanated from the masked visage of a Lucarian scholar, his jewel-tipped catalyst spinning away from him and rolling along the floor until Naruto stopped it with his heel. "How many does this make this morning?" he asked Kurama, kicking the catalyst up into his hands before promptly snapping it over his knee. The great fox sleepily opened a single sizable red eye, stifling a yawn as the scholar clambered to his feet, biting out antiquated curses towards the blonde. "One shy of a baker's dozen, seems to be a busy day." Naruto rolled his eyes in exasperation. How the hell do they keep getting in? I'd have thought Rennala would have closed down all the secret paths into the grounds. She's too busy taking care of the munchkin, though I doubt she'll be able to convince her to give your jacket back. Melina is rather attached to it. "Damn it, I really like that jacket," Naruto said, finally addressing the scholar who was imperiously pointing a withered finger at him. "Hey there, sorry about breaking your glitter stick, but you did try to shoot me in the back of the head. The Queen's offer of forgiveness still stands. Are you going to be smart or dumb like the rest of you scholars?" he asked, tapping the toes of his sandals on the floor. While Rennala was content to just have them talk to her, he and Bogart had tried to make themselves useful in their new digs. Bogart had sequestered himself in the large academy kitchens from which he produced a variety of delicious meals for the group of 3 adults, 1 child, a wolf, and a giant lobster every night. It seemed that the usually gruff, distrusting blackguard was very happy to have a fully stocked pantry to work with rather than whatever game he could scrap together. You despicable jackanape. You dare to wear the raiments of sacred Rhea Lucaria and compare me to an imbecile? You are a fool and heretic. The scholar screeched at him, his whole head mask and mortarboard wobbling comically. The fallen moon harlot is a heretic gone mad. We drove her into the library in her madness and stood vigil to ensure she stayed there, while we studied the mysteries she kept for herself. Naruto let the scholar's tirade peter off before raising a finger and gesturing at the defanged magical practitioner. So I'm gonna take that as a no. You lot say in 50 words what could have been said in 5, so I can't really tell. No, the scholar screamed again, then felt a chill race up his spine when Naruto's face broke into a predatory rictus. Okay then, he said before vanishing in a blur of movement, seizing the masked man and lifting him off his feet effortlessly. Still in motion, Naruto twisted on his heel and let his foe slip wide. He span once, twice, thrice, building in centrifugal force until the scholar was little more than a blur of billowing robes. Then with a flourish, Naruto let him go. The scholar was launched over the edge of the annex and over the academy walls with great speed, pirouetting end over end like a cloth pinwheel before splashing down in the mist-covered lakes. It was with no small pleasure that Naruto watched the annoying weeds skip atop the surface of the lake like a stone until he was well out of sight. Baker's dozen, time for lunch. He chirped before resuming his walk towards the inner sanctums of the academy in search of Bogart and Renala. While the blackguard had appointed himself the cook, Naruto had set about cleaning out the academy in more ways than one. The undead had been the easiest to rend down to nothingness, their crypts having burned at his touch after clearing out the initial infestation. The giant trap had been a health and safety hazard he could not stand Melina to be around, and now served as a toy for the giant lobster and red wolf. And cleaning proved surprisingly expedient with shadow clones. The scholar, however, had proven to be an annoying thorn in their collective backside. After the first night, Renala made an address through her magic to the scholars and sorcerers that had hemmed her into the library for reasons he had yet to ask. She understood their actions and was willing to offer clemency if they surrendered peacefully. Some of them had done so, but the majority hadn't, still drunk off the power of running the place. They had waged a series of annoying guerrilla attacks under the leadership of an elusive sorceress Selen who had evaded capture. So every day was spent rooting them out and quite literally tossing them over the boundary. He hoped that their tide would stop soon because he was getting really tired of interrupting time, with Renala explaining her view on his own situation. "Papa," came a familiar cry of happiness, causing Naruto's smile to grow as he stepped into the apartments of the headmistress. Melina toddled towards him, his black jacket swaddled around her like an oversized cloak. Dropping to one knee, he offered no resistance when the young girl embraced him before scurrying around him to rest on his back, arms around his neck. "Someone's happy this afternoon," he chirped, feeling her pudgy fists play with his thicket of golden spikes. He sniffed deeply when she nuzzled into his neck, her fuzzy head of hair tickling his nose. "Oof, you smell like dog." "Tea would be our fault, methinks," a crisp, amused voice cut through the hall. Renala gracefully descended the steep stairs with Radagon's red wolf at her side. She cast an amused look down at her companion. "This one more so. I have endeavored to bathe in more than rainwater." The great wolf chuffed indignantly at his queen's words before bounding down the steps to pad around Naruto. "You're looking better," Naruto observed neutrally before taking in the grandiose entry hall of the apartments, completely missing the dusting of pink that briefly tinged the full moon queen's cheeks at his comment. Indeed, compared to the foggy-eyed, half-mad witch queen who had done little more than croon over a golden egg a few weeks ago, the woman before him was a true aristocratic beauty. Her long black hair had been split into a silky ponytail secured by a gilded red ribbon with long bangs framing her healthier face. Renala pursed her lips, painted a glossy maroon, in amusement, beating the warmth in her cheeks away. "Thy words are kind, young errant, the first I have heard in some time," she compliments, descending the rest of the steps to stand face to face with the blonde. She had traded out the commodious headmistress robes in favor of a long-sleeved bustle dress in midnight blue, its scarlet petticoats peeking out from the ankle-length hem. Naruto gave Renala a playfully aggravated look. "How many times do I have to ask you to just call me Naruto? The whole decorum stuff really ain't me." Looking up at her, it hit Naruto again just how tall the full moon queen was. Even at his 6 feet, she was a good head taller than him. Renala's eyes crinkled in amusement. "A few times yet, Naruto," she managed to say, thrilled by the novelty of being able to use given names again. Now, would you and the sweeting care to join me for lunch? There is still so much of your tale I wish to discuss. Naruto wasn't sure what to think of the glint in her pretty eyes, and scholarly interest underscored by the lonely need for interaction and acknowledgement that he knew very well. Of course, I'm starving as is, and I don't think Melina will forgive me if I eat without her, he posited, proven correct when a pair of pudgy fists bonked either side of his head. Silly papa, we always eat together, Melina stated like it was a fact of the world, drawing amusement and exasperation in equal parts from the adults before Renala bade him to follow her, the scent of untold culinary delicacies wafting through the doors. Far distant from the steadily warming halls of Rhea Lucaria stood a rise, and upon its zenith a thin tower, its entrance glinting in the afternoon sun from the variety of large blue crystals that jutted from the ground. Ascending the spiral staircase to the tallest pat revealed a homey, if dusty, room festooned on all sides with countless books. Many of them were confined to tall wooden bookshelves, their aged LTHR bindings frayed with time and use, while a great many more sat piled around the floor itself, almost blocking out the windows. In this odd, yet strangely homey space, two figures could be observed, one daintily perched upon a wooden throne, while the other, much larger and hairier, was bent to one knee in front of them. "Blade, you are my shadow, one who I have the utmost confidence in," Ranni said, her voice level and full of royal grace. "And to date, you have never once fed me a falsehood nor half-truth. This I know, as do you." The great Wolfen Knight lowered his head in practiced appreciation of the praise, years of service preventing his ears from wagging in excitement. Yet his large blue eyes remained fixed on his MSTRS. He knew that despite her voice and demeanor, his latest report had set Ranni on edge. Her four hands, usually clasped in the lap of her snow-white gown in stately repose, were all out of sorts. Two embraced one another in an epic display of twiddling thumbs with the porcelain digits nothing more than blurs. Another was fiddling with the wide brim of her hat, while the final hand was twisting in esoteric mudras, drawing magical sigils on the air. "I am much obliged in your faith, as always, my lady. If there's anything else you need know, then simply ask." Lips peeling back to smile sheepishly, Blade added, "But there isn't much more to tell than you already know." Ranni's brow twitched, her shoulders slumping in mock of a sigh, a force of habit even without a true body. "Just indulge your MSTRS's curiosity a moment longer, sweet Blade. As you command, so it shall be." The tall shadow rumbled out, shifting his footing before slipping to sit on the ground and cross his legs. "Right then," Ranni said, steeling herself before pushing on. "Several weeks ago, I perceived a shift in the heavens, and to the best of my divinations, whatever it was had headed in the direction of Liurnia, to which I sent you to investigate. Aye, and I must say I'm glad you furnished me with new armor for it. I didn't relish trying to remain hidden with rusty greaves scraping against each other." The wolf-headed figure chipped in, drawing a stiff nod of assent from Ranni. "And in that time, you discovered nothing for the first few days, and were about to return to me when you spotted something more peculiar than usual," she uttered, reluctant to continue for the idiocy of the rest of the story. A blonde vagabond, an iron-masked blackguard, and an aspiring maiden tucked into the blonde sling, all riding atop one of Liurnia's great crustaceans as if it were a housebroken steed. Blade nodded. I'm unsure how the trio managed to wrangle the thing, but it was taken a bit and bridle well enough, as well as I could see through my binoculars anyway." Ranni pressed a set of hands to her temples, while the others braced her on the armrest of her wooden throne. "And upon seeing this miraculous transit of strong shelled beast of burden, you followed it all the way to the walls of Rhea Lucaria, where they could not pass the warded gate, until it came undone and my mother of all people welcomed them inside." The doll-bodied witch said to him, her eyes full of disbelief, "You're quite sure it was her?" Grinning wolfishly, Blade answered honestly, "Oh yes, she even had your father's great hound at her side. I'd never forget that big red beast." Gathering her thoughts, Ranni fell into silence for several minutes, thinking about the rest of the story, of how apparently the trio, particularly the blonde, had set themselves up in the academy before seeking to rid the grounds of the traitorous former faculty and students of the cornerstone of Lucaria. Miraculous, borderline impossible in fact. The last she had known her mother was beyond help, her mind addled by the emotional damage of her father's returning to America, her own death and the mental damage of overusing the great rune in such a state. She still checked in on her mother from time to time. Even if the wards of the academy were deeply annoying to get past, she made sure her mother was at least comfortable in her madness. Yet these newcomers had brought something with them, something that had seemingly done the impossible and seen Ranela, the full moon queen, return to lucidity. It filled Ranni with joy and an intense, almost paranoid worry. What could do something so miraculous that I had written it off as impossible? Is this the great change I perceived making its way to Liurnia? Do I trust it to be near my mother? She thought, clasping all four hands together, while Blade waited patiently at her feet. Ranni had a complicated relationship with her family, but her mother was one that she had never for an instant stopped loving, and right now something new and powerful lodged next to her. Is there anything my lady would have me do? Blade asked, breaking the silence and returning Ranni to the present. She hummed in thought, weighing the pros and cons of everything they knew and everything they did not. We are in a critical lack of information, something that we must rectify. Blade, travel to Rhea Lucaria and observe this trio and mother. Find out what you can without getting too close, but if any of them should prove a danger to mother, then dash them against the rocks. Blade rose to one knee. It will be done, my lady, and if they should prove benign and affable to conversation. Ranni gave a strained smile in reply. Then, I have some explaining to do, something I should have done a long time ago. There was a sea of metal on the carpet as her shadow rose to his towering height before retrieving his greatsword and leaving the tower. Ranni was left alone, slowly but surely letting her face fall into her hands. Mother, what are you doing right now? Off with your clothes. Naruto sputtered. Excuse me. After a long, pleasant lunch in which Naruto had been asked a never-ending series of questions that ranged from the type of moon that had hung on the night of his BRTH to his experience with the mysterious voice that brought him to the lands between, Ranela had insisted that he accompany her into her workshop. Perplexed, Naruto had followed, expecting to find a tool shed only to be brought into what seemed closer to a Baroque medical clinic. It was a perfect octagon edged with pillars composed of compacted glintstone that glowed when Ranela and Naruto had entered. A great relief of the Carian royal sigil was set into the marble floor in rivulets of molten gold that maintained their glow and liquid state even though it held no heat. Dozens of tables, desks and cabinets were arranged with an incomprehensible order and meaning, all with magical artifacts that span and word in their own unique way. The most noticeable thing about the workshop was its roof. A perfect parabolic dome carved from sapphire and glintstone bearing stained glass representations of the heavenly bodies that moved through the dome in an orrery. His host had left Naruto standing next to what appeared to be a plush medical examination table upholstered in quilted cobalt blue cushions and red buttons. The blonde had watched on perplexed as the queen had busied herself retrieving a silver tray which she piled with a series of tools that he couldn't make head nor tails of. When all was said and done, she had laid the collection on a small table next to the examination table, then rounded on the Uzumaki and asked him to strip much to his protest. Ranela wasn't having it. With surprising speed, she undid the buttons on the doublet and tugged his shirt off. I need to see those runes on your back and chest. Oi oi oi, not so rough, Naruto complained, being able to do little more than flail as the taller woman methodically stripped him of his clothes until he was in little more than his underwear and sandals before manhandling him onto the examination table. Quelvine complained, I am a mother of 3. There is nothing beneath your clothes that I haven't seen before. Ranela said teasingly, finding Naruto's bleats of annoyance and indignant blushing to be greatly amusing. Kurama took this moment to chime in and add to Naruto's mounting embarrassment. I know my knowledge of human mating rituals is sketchy at best, but I was under the impression that a woman tearing your clothes off was a sign of a good time. Kurama chuckled. Screw off, you furry instigator, Naruto blushed, the warmth in his cheeks remaining as he let his arms drop to rest on the provided armrests. The amused smile was still on Ranela's face when she was content with Naruto's positioning, and then her eyes gained that intense scholarly interest again as she began her examination. Picking up a gem-tipped stylus, she gave Naruto the request to remain as still as he could before she began to run the tool gently over the broad black runes that scrawled across the young blonde man's chest. They settled into a comfortable silence as she worked, the only sounds punctuating the silence being the tinkling sounds of the various magical apparatus, and the scratching of Renala making notes in a fresh journal of her findings. Zoning out, Naruto didn't notice the slight warmth returning to Renala's cheeks as she roughly sketched out an anatomical drawing of Naruto's chest and how the runes were inlaid across it. A modicum of embarrassment twisted in her chest even as she maintained a serious focus. For her prior mention of having seen scantily dressed men before, she couldn't deny that Naruto's had a level of aesthetic appeal. Down girl, it may have been decades since Raiden, but you can hold off sordid thoughts long enough to do your job, she thought, adding a tad more shadow to give the diagram more realism for later reference. 10 minutes later, and finally Naruto could not hold his silence any longer. Say, Renala. The Carrion Royal answered, pausing from where she sat at a lectern, cross-referencing her notes with storied tomes and astrology charts. There's something that I've been curious about since I arrived here, something that keeps getting brought up, but I haven't the foggiest what they mean. Naruto leant up on the examination table, resting his weight on one arm. What the hell even is the Elden Ring? That's something of a loaded query, young Naruto, said Renala, rising from the seat behind the lectern and manifesting her catalyst in a shimmer of blue light. Tea would be easier to show thee. Somewhat slowly, the Witch Queen raised her catalyst until a small orb of glittering magic emerged from its jeweled tip before rising up into the air, Naruto's eyes following it as it began to unwind and bend into a complicated shape. Think of the Elden Ring as a metaphysical foundation, composed of many runes that each symbolize a facet of the lands between. The spectral pictogram continued to grow and twist until it reached its final shape, a quartet of interlocked circles bisected by a long, thin line that was topped by a pair of parabolic arches. It was a gift from the Greater Will, the deity which, from your vivid story, I believe brought you here. The gold voice, Naruto ventured, the shadows from the flickering light playing across his face. It would not be too far of a venture. The will is hardly beyond manipulations and indirect intervention in the creation that it views the lands as. Especially after Marika, Renala trailed off, a note of bitter sadness briefly bleeding into her words before shaking her head to rid herself of old ghosts. She jabbed the staff towards the representation of the Elden Ring. Naruto watched it shatter into myriad smaller fragments. Shattered the ring, it split into its constituent facets, becoming the great runes that the Emperor tore the realm apart to gain, some of which are now carved into your flesh. Naruto's eyes bugged in their sockets, sputtering out a what? Indeed it is. Your condition is similar to Queen Marika in that you have had greater runes carved directly into your being, though not ones that I have seen before. With a snap of her fingers, Renala rearranged the Elden Ring above her head into 4 runes, as well as numerous extraneous lines. Whilst I know not the machinations at work here, I can at least tell you of their meaning in the language of the starts handed down by the Carrion lineage. Swiping her finger to point at the first 3 runes, she began to list their meaning: serenity, compassion, healing. She then pointed to the largest of the runes, her voice briefly hitching before she returned to normal life. Naruto stared at the runes, deep in thought, even as they faded away. He absent-mindedly ran his hands over the runes branded into his body, feeling the muted power that tingled deep within them. For every answer, a million more questions, Kurama commiserated, just as frustrated as Naruto was perturbed. What does it all mean? Naruto eventually asked, swnging his legs over the end of the examination table, regarding Renala curiously. I don't honestly know. Not entirely. I believe it was the proximity to me with these runes that abated my madness. But for the truth to be found, there is yet to be much research. All I can do is warn you that it is likely not as benevolent as it seems, Naruto. A deep silence passed between them, Naruto quietly sleeping his clothes back on as he contemplated these new truths. What fate was the will setting for him to fulfill? Little did he know that Renala was of a similar mind. Where will you go from here? Have you given any thought to your next destination? She asked quietly. Not really. Naruto shrugged. So long as Melina's happy, I'm good. Taking a deep breath, Renala asked something that she had wanted to ever since the trio had first turned up on her doorstep. Could you not stay a while? 'Tis safe here. He paused a second, then flashed a bright grin, smiling as the woman smiled in turn. I'd like that. Millicent looked at herself in the mirror, barely recognizing herself. The definable details were still there, the blazing gold eyes and fiery red hair characteristic of those touched by the rot, but she had never been so clean. Instead of her gray and stained red bodice and boots, she was clad in a flowing black and gold chiton with a brooch of the Golden Order holding it closed. She heard a set of steps approach the door to the chamber. The doors opened and a pair of women dressed in the gold and white habit of nuns in service to the Golden Order. The younger of the pair openly sneered at Millicent, while the elder looked at her with neutral reverence. "It is time, child." Silently nodding, Millicent followed the pair of sisters through the vaulted corridors of this temple of the Golden Order. The details of her dream with the Greater will remain seared cleanly into her rot-addled mind. Every detail of what the outer god had desired, why it needed her, and what it would give her if she played along. She had hardly been in any position to refuse the offer, and thus had done as she was bade, traveled on foot to the Altus Plateau to a temple of the Golden Order. When she had seen locked swords and raised shields at her approach, Millicent had contemplated running away, but the cooler heads of the priests had prevailed. They had known she was coming. The words of the Greater will commune to them through the fingers, foretelling of the arrival of a child of Rot. Taken within, she had been prepared for the ritual that was required of her. She was bathed in blessed water to burn away any outer corruption of the Rot. She grimaced at the memory. Many of the priests here seethed at the very concept of someone touched by another outer god. The sisters in charge of purifying her for the ritual had enjoyed the sounds of her screams, as the holy waters seared necrotic lesions shut and left Millicent with clean skin for the first time in years. The chiton felt breezy as she stepped through the halls and corridors, the distant sound of muffled bells and hymns permeating the walls that grew louder as they came closer to the central chamber. A dull ache thumped up from her stump of a right arm. The Rot was not happy to be so close to them, but the purification and consecrated clothing kept it at bay for now. Passing into the main hall, she nearly faltered at the sight of them. A long hall lined on either side by priests and sisters, each clutching a ceremonial bell and incense burner. The scent of heavy incense punched at the senses, but what caused the redhead to falter was the finger, a trio of them poking crookedly from the desiccated palm that served as an altar. Swallowing thickly, Millicent attempted to stride with purpose down the lines of priests, doing her best to ignore their myriad stares until she was before the fingers, slowly kneeling at the Golden Order's sigil on the floor. For several minutes there was nothing, no movement or sounds beyond breathing and the shuffling of cloth, and then it began. From the end of the lines, the priests began to slowly ring their bells, one by one down the line. By the time all were taking part, the cathedral-sized main hall was booming with their sound, enough for Millicent to wince in slight pain. Pain that was soon swept under the rug by trepidation when the fingers began to move. Slowly, the trio of fingers began to bend back until they were an open hand before veins of a familiar golden light crawled up their lengths. Slowly turning inwards with arthritic cracks, the fingers converged until they were separated by exactly 2 feet, then began to spark with motes of golden light that swirled and coalesced above Millicent's head, resolving into a microcosm of familiar auric nebulae. "Child of Rot, heed my words and obey," came the sonorous voice of the Greater Will boomed in infrasound, drawing startled cries from the less believing clergy. "Name thyself and announce thy reason for hearkening to my will." Momentarily struck dumb by the tremendous pressure pushing down on her, Millicent's voice was barely a whisper yet still carried across the entire cathedral. "I am Millicent, a child of the Rot, and I come to seek a boon from the Greater Will, for which I shall do thy bidding to achieve." Indeed it was, a boon offered for a service rendered. "Speak then of what you are required to do." The words were well practiced, even if the voice that spoke them was somewhat afraid, the Rot squealing in her guts to run as far away from this thing as possible. An elden beast was called to the lands between to set right the world gone mad. Yet it has gone astray and must be made to know its place in the causality of the world. The fingers vibrated ghoulishly as the facsimile stars glittered in what might have been a laugh of approval. From the heart of the golden star cluster, strings of golden energy span into existence before slowly snaking down to where Millicent quavered, their heat warming her skin in the otherwise cold hall. "Good, they know thy place and purpose, to follow the plan and help correct those that will not. Then speak, Millicent, child of Rot and descendant of a WHR's bloodline. What boon do you seek for this service?" Closing her eyes before opening them, Millicent's arms raised up in a pose of reverence. The same pose as Queen Marika on the distant stained glass window, now dark with the evening. "I beg of thee, grant me a body unspoiled, made new, and that no rot can blight, I accept any charge or BNDGE to free myself of being overrun as my ancestors were, so that I may meet them with pure heart and redeemed body." She remained in the pose for some time with the golden threads swirling around her, her stump of her right arm beginning to throb again. She feared for a time that the light would simply dim and her request would go unfulfilled. Pain roared through her when, without warning, the golden threads plunged themselves into her skin, burrowing deep through the veins and arteries of her body and filling her with unearthly golden light. "You ask too much. The rod is meant to be a blight for the actions of your ancestors, and one I will not completely free you of." Motes of golden light rained down on the screaming redhead, swirling around her in an ever-growing denser cocoon of light. Yet a boon was asked. "So I do unto you the gift of regression and strength, your body renewed." Millicent's golden eyes looked around wildly before feeling a molten burning at the tip of her stump, strands of golden light and fire manifesting and solidifying into the shape of an arm. Yet the fog, heat and light grew brighter, feeling as if she was growing smaller. No, she was growing smaller. Let regression lead you to the beast, and let the beast bring about the wheels of causality. The accord is made. In a flash of brilliance that rendered the closest priests and sisters blind, Millicent vanished in a tide of sound indescribable to mortals, a perverse apotheosis and transmogrification that would never be written about, a travesty done by a supposedly benevolent god and sent to set things right. It was a calculated risk. But stars above, was it bad at maths? Sensation returned to Millicent slowly, pulling her out of the white sensory overload like a photographer slowly closing the aperture on his camera. Tactile and olfactory information pulled itself from the white noise until finally, she could see again, slowly looking around her with wide eyes akin to an owl. She felt tingly, from the ends of her hair to the tips of her fingers and toes. She blinked, then slowly raised her arms in front of her face and stared, confused, and the two sets of fingers and thumbs that twitched before her, the flesh pinkened with newness. Unbidden, she let out a high-pitched squeal, not quite terror, but neither surprise. She was euphoric. Her arms, they were restored, her body made new, and the ever-present voice of the rot little more than a cowed voice at her core. She jumped up and down in happiness, spinning around and letting her bare feet become caked in mud. Something in the back of her mind telling her that she was thigh-deep in water, and that something was amiss. She paid it no mind, sloshing through the water and kicking at its surface with a burble of pure, excited happiness. Her legs had never been so smooth or short. "What?" Millicent slowly came to a stop and once again brought her hands in front of her face, disturbed to find that they too were shorter than they should be, and pudgier with a baby fat she had long since lost. "What is?" she stuttered before grabbing her throat, her voice much higher pitched than she remembered. She stepped backwards with mounting panic and let out a cry of distress when she slipped on a bed of silt, sending her to land on her rump, now up to her armpits in water. Powerful emotions, old emotions, childish emotions began to lap at her soul in earnest, as confusion drove the former warrior woman into a frenzy, only to stop when she caught the reflection of her face on the surface of the water. The important details were still there, but they were changed. Her gold eyes and bob of red hair was now set into the face of a child, no older than 6, a child whose eyes were slowly filling with confused tears. "I know this regression," she lisped, on the verge of hyperventilating. In its infinite wisdom and infinitely idiotic understanding of humanity, the greater will had blundered, in its attempt to both fulfill Millicent's request, yet still maintain the punishment of the redhead's ancestors. It had returned Millicent to a child and strengthened her body to be able to resist the rot, not wasting the effort in preventing the mentality of a child coming with it. She may have still had the mind and memories of an adult, but the extreme emotions and low thresholds of resistance were washing rational thought aside. Right now she was a confused 6-year-old, submerged in a sodden dress and unsure what to do even as she whipped her head from left to right. "Are you okay?" Millicent turned in the direction of a young girl's voice and took in her surroundings a little more. Instead of some bog or evil witch's forest, she found herself sitting in front of the bottom of a winding rampart leading to the entrance of what appeared to be a castle, surrounded on all sides by water and glowing with a cool blue light. Pretty her childish mentality conjured into her psyche, making her instantly remember her own distress. "No, I'm not okay. I don't know," she squealed, thumping a hand in the water before shivering at the touch of her wet black chitin that now clung to her like an oversized leech. "Are you cold?" the young girl's voice said again, drawing Millicent's eyes up to its source and widening. She saw a little girl with plum-colored hair and a sealed eye looking down at her with childish concern. An oversized black jacket slung around her shoulders and rustling in the evening wind. What scared Millicent, though, was the gigantic red wolf that the little girl was sitting astride, looking at her with predatory interest. Please don't eat me." The other girl's face became quizzical before patting the great red wolf between the ears, drawing a pleased chuff. "Eat you? No, Doggy would never hurt anyone. He only hurts bad people. Are you cold?" the girl said before her eyes flashed in realization. "Sorry, I'm Melina, by the way. I live here with my papa, Biggie Bog, and the pretty lady." Millicent, teeth now chattering, knew rationally that she should leave this place, find gear and lodging before heading into unknown territory. But the childish part that only coveted warmth and succor was firmly at the reins. "Millie C. Ent, CCC cold." Her words were accompanied with a plume of steam. "Huh, Millie, do you want to come inside? Papa is always telling me to help people when I can," Melina said, holding out a pudgy fist in offer. Not trusting her tongue, Millicent nodded feverishly, letting out a yelp when the great red canine stepped behind her and picked her up by the neck of her chitin, carrying her as if she was a fresh-born cub up the rampart towards the light and warmth of the castle, the giggling of Melina ringing through the air like joyous church bells. "Ha ha, I found a sister, Papa," echoed through the night, followed closely by the sub-audible tumult of celestial fury within the domain of the greater will. While there is no translation to the common tongue of what the greater will said in that moment, the closest analog would likely be, "Damn it, not again. Papa, look, I found a sister." "Sure, that's great, oi. Who is this small red-headed child, and where did she come from?" Melina thought Papa took it pretty well, all things considered. "You whoop. Pretty well. Papa, look, I found a sister." "Sure, sweetie." Naruto looked up from his journal absently. "That's great, oi." "Oi, indeed." Melina had come traipsing in with Renala's red wolf as always. Not a problem, that. What was a problem would be the little red-headed girl currently dangling from in its jaws by the hem of her cloak like some kind of naughty kitten. His brain fizzled at the sight of it all. This was not what he'd expected to find their enthusiastic walk. Belatedly, he realized they were waiting for his response. Naruto eyed the wolf with a sidelong glance. "Sit." It obeyed almost immediately, and in doing so, dropped its prey. "Ha, good boy. Now, then," he closed his journal with a snap, set his mug down, and rose from his chair. "Who is this small red-headed child, and where did she come from?" "This is Millie," Melina warmed to the question as only a child could. Well, her real name's Millicent, but that's too long, so I'm gonna call her Millie." The girl in question raised her hand. "Don't I get a say in this?" "Nope." Naruto clapped a hand to his forehead. "Of course not. You said you found her?" "Yup," came her happy chirrup. "Where? Surely she hadn't walked that far?" "In the yard?" "Outside the academy." She must have seen the look in his eyes too, because she immediately clasped her hands. "Can we keep her? I always wanted a sister." "Eh?" In all fairness, Naruto hadn't meant to shout just now, but shout he did and immediately regretted it. Melina barely batted an eyelash at his startled squawk, all too used to his wild exclamations and silly outbursts. But the new girl, she sniffled. Just a little, just once, just a tad. It was enough. He knew waterworks were coming, less so the reply that followed. "You're loud," her voice warbled, reaching that pitch only a child could just before bursting into tears. "And mean." The words were a dagger in his gut. Me? Mean? I'm really not, you just surprised me." Another sniffle. "Really? Really?" He lowered his voice and cast about in vain for anything that might calm her down. No dice. Melina looked even more baffled than he felt. Renala's wolf had wandered off to who knew where when he wasn't looking, and he didn't have anything to eat or drink handy. Just his hands. In vain, he attempted to pat her head. There. Millicent absolutely froze beneath his palm, eyes bulging. Oh dear. Had he frightened her even more? "See?" Melina bowled her way in from the right side to press against him. "Papa's nice." Millicent still hadn't moved. Was she broken? Worried, he took his hand away. "I didn't say stop." "What's all this ruckus about?" A bemused sigh heralded Renala's arrival and his salvation, near the stairs. Thou wert making quite the commotion, and it suddenly grew quiet. She took one look at little Millicent, and Naruto saw her maternal instincts slam into place. Melina was one thing, but Millie, as Melina chosen to nickname her, was on the very verge of tears, hiccuping now as she scrubbed at her eyes. Countless emotions flitted across her face, gone before he could even hope to sense them all. Perhaps, had he known the truth, or her past, he would have understood why Rennala froze as she did. Why she took a trembling step forward now. "Ranni, you poor girl, come here." There was nearly no chance for evasion, let alone questions. Naruto had half an instant to step aside. Then the queen all but dove on Millicent, sweeping her off the floor, up into her arms, holding her flush against her bosom. The little redhead absolutely froze in her grasp, and that was another tell. A sure sign that she'd never before experienced the comforting warmth of a hug. Rennala remained blind to all of it, seemingly lost in the throes of some distant memory. "Tell me what ails thee. Mother will make it better." Guileless golden eyes blinked up at her. "But you're not my mother." Rennala flinched. Naruto blinked. Who in blazes was Ranni? Melina saved them both. "Her name isn't Ranni, silly. She's Millie." "Millie." Naruto coughed into a fist. "Short for Millicent." "Oh," Rennala's face fell, completely crestfallen. "I see. My apologies. I suppose I'm not your mother." The words brought her back from her daze. "My apologies, child. Unless—" She drew the girl's little head and looked upon her anew. "Dost thou have a mother?" A glum shake of her little head followed. "No? Excellent." Her tone brooked no argument. "Then henceforth, I am thy mother." Yikes, how did one argue with a four of nature like that? Millicent certainly didn't. Something finally caved in her, and she latched on for dear life. She started bawling a moment later. Poor girl, what kind of child burst into tears from something so singular? Just who was she, really? Rennala reacted as any mother would and cooed softly. "Such a darling girl, wherever did you come from?" Question of the hour, that... Something kicked in Naruto's chest as he watched Duo. It was a strange feeling, something he couldn't quite quantify. He'd felt it before when Rennala fussed over Melina, yet now it returned with a vengeance. She looked good with kids. A natural, really, better than he could be. She clearly had experience at this sort of things, more than him at any rate. He liked that, you know, made him feel like he wasn't quite so alone in this. That was a good thing, wasn't it? A tiny hand tugged at his sleeve. He looked down to find Melina pouting. "What's wrong?" She kicked at the ground. "Want a hug, too. Sleepy." Easily remedied. Naruto opened his arms. "Well, what are you waiting for?" Little legs carried her forward. Naruto met her halfway and let her leap into his arms. She cuddled close. The greater will seethed. This was not over. No. Nay, never. It would see its new beast brought to heel. No matter the cost. "Are they asleep?" Soundly. Rennala eased the door shut behind her with barely a whisper. "I had not thought they'd fall asleep so quickly." Naruto wasn't surprised. Melina had snuggled up with Millicent for an afternoon nap, and the two had proven nigh on inseparable since. Good. He was glad to see her making friends, although she still insisted Millicent was her new sister. Better yet, if her presence brought the bereaved redhead some semblance of comfort, then more power to her. Shame this world didn't have cameras. He'd have to settle for his eyes instead and carve the scene into his memory. They were just two DMN cute snuggled up like that. "Come," Rennala walked past him. "Let us leave the girls to their rest." "Sure." Naruto hummed noncommittally and followed her down the hall. Curiosity nagged at him still, until finally, he had to give it voice. "Back there, you called Millicent Ranni. What's up with that?" Rennala missed a step and walked into a pillar with a yelp. He moved to catch her only for her to squeak again and thrash out of his arms. Kurama radiated smug contempt. "Told you so." "Yes, I'm sure you noticed." The queen flinched, sighed, then comported herself. "My daughter, Ranni, she once looked much as young Millicent does. Red hair, golden eyes, and every bit a crybaby." A blonde brow arched, but he couldn't quite hide his smile. "No." "Yes," she laughed softly, wiping a rueful tear from her eye. "You should have seen her. My daughter never could be honest with her feelings. The slightest thing would set her off. be it a stubbed toe, an argument with her brothers, or a failed lesson. She was always clinging to my skirts before. Before? Renala's face closed down, walls of icy pain locking around her mind. Another time, perhaps? Naruto sensed a story there, but for once, his every instinct howled at him not to pry. From what little he'd learned of her, he didn't think he'd like what he found in her past. Maybe that made him a coward, but here and now, he desperately didn't want to broach the subject. Things were good right now, no matter how chaotic his days might be. He didn't want them to change. With that thought, fatigue crashed down on him at last. "I'm tired." Renala blinked. "Pardon?" "Don't worry about it." The blonde stifled a yawn with the back of his hand. "Just need some rest. It's been a crazy day." "Yes, it certainly has." She seemed to warm to the idea all too quickly, another sign she wasn't eager to have him dig into her past. "Perhaps you could rest in a ham." She coughed harshly into a fist to stifle her words. "No, never mind." Was that a hint of pink in her cheeks just now? Maybe? He wondered why. "Think nothing of it." Her words came a little too quickly, almost frantic really. "I hope you sleep well. Might I speak to you again on the morrow?" "Sure. My door's always open." Kurama absolutely cackled in the back of his head. So bold. For some reason that turned her Renala red all over again. There are things I must attend to. Fare thee well." Naruto watched her go. Flee, really. His eyes betrayed him and focused on her SWNGNG hips. Was it just him, or was there an extra sway in her hips today? She'd stopped wearing those loose robes long ago for reasons he still didn't understood, instead opting for garments that better emphasized her curved. But he'd never really noticed until this moment. Here and now, he couldn't bring himself to complain. "You're staring." "Why no. Treachery." He shook his head to clear it. Treacherous thoughts. Renala. Sure, she acted strange at times and baffled him at others, but she'd proven herself a good hose. More than that, she was good with Melina too, and now little Millie as well. He didn't want to mess that up. He couldn't screw that up. He absolutely mustn't ruin it. Whatever these strange feelings were, whatever they might become, he couldn't let them get in the way of his girls. "Your girls, eh?" Kurama's reply smacked of smugness. "Buzz off. Not like anyone else is going to look after them." Renala would. Leave it to the old kitsune to poke holes in his argument. Bogart too, if you asked. You could leave them here. Never. The anger he felt, the anguish at the idea of being separated proved visceral, so much so that he found himself taking a quick breath before speaking again. "I won't abandon Melina. I promised." "And the new girl?" Naruto firmed up his jaw. "Oh, there's your answer then. You've gotten attached, even if you don't want to admit it. Softy." He thumped a wall with his fist in passing. "Hush, you." Kurama most assuredly didn't. 2 kids and not even married yet. Such a scandal. Whatever will your folks think? He knew the answer. Kushina, if she were still alive, would have been over the moon for little Melina and Millicent. He could just imagine it now. Grandbabies. Ooh, just look at you two. You're adorable. Minato, well, he could just imagine them SWNGNG off Dad's back and shoulders, using his old man as a human jungle gym, laughing their heads off all the while. Well, Melina would certainly do the laughing. Not so sure about Millicent. Still, the point remained. Warmed his heart, it did, even if it made him miss them all the more. I won't give up on them, he decided. Any of them. Don't ask me to. Wasn't gonna. He frowned. You were testing me, weren't you? A pause. And then, I was. Regardless, you passed. Passed what? Call it curiosity. I wanted to see the strength of your devotion. What now? Therein lie the question. Millicent's surprise arrival aside, he wasn't sure what he wanted right now, beyond sleep. Well, I'm not really in a hurry to do anything, but I feel like I should be doing something. Something that didn't involve sleep, but he'd already reached his room, and the door parted all too easily for him. I just don't know sometimes. Might have something to do with those runes on your back. Maybe. He shrugged as he made his way to bed. I can't help but feel we're forgetting something. Or maybe someone? Meh, it's probably nothing. Naruto kicked off his boots, drew back the covers. See, he yawned a little. When you say it like that, it's definitely something. Sleep came quickly. Selen prided herself on her curiosity. It was a point of some contention amongst many. More than a few would claim that said curiosity had driven her to profane, obscene depths. Fools, the lot of them. It was no sin to be curious. Likewise, she held no grudge against Renala. Truly, she didn't. If she'd simply permit her access to the Grand Library, then all would be well. The Carrion Queen was simply in her way, as was this strange consort she'd taken under her wing. Her spies had seen little of the latter before said spies had been silenced by the infernal blonde. They weren't even dead at that, just gone. Ordinarily, she would dare not approach them, or so she thought, but she wanted to know. How did he do it? How had he done it? She needed to know. She was a MSTRS of magic, but this spell or whatever rhyme or reason they were using to expel the sorcerers from the academy baffled her. How had they expunged them so, while keeping them from returning? There must be a way to see it, to learn it, a way into the academy. She must know. The need to ascertain the answers gnawed at her, consuming her every waking moment. For in her heart of hearts, Selen was a scholar, and scholars craved answers to all things. She would not be deterred. Surely there was a way to slip into the academy, now that the barrier was done. Perhaps she could disguise herself? No, an ordinary disguise would never work. He'd see right through her. Aha! She had just the thing. Sleep never came easily for Godric the Grafted. Within the confines of his dilapidated chambers at the heart of Stromvale Castle, the misshapen royal thrashed upon his moldering mattress, his many extraneous limbs twitching nonsensically. Fingers of a dozen hands spasmed in search of something to grip onto in hopes of riding out the storm of horror that raged within that misshapen body, sinews and tendons creaking with a noise that no man should ever have to hear. He let out a whimper, a wordless moan that was neither curse nor apology, just a pathetic noise uttered from a piteous creature. It had always been like this. Since the beginning, long before he had perverted his body into its grotesque grandeur, Godric has never slept well. It was another reason why his kin, the golden lineage, had derided his weakness when he had still called the capital home. The BLD of Godwin was thin in his veins, they would say. Marika's light illuminated him just enough to make him look pathetic day or night. It hadn't changed with a shattering. The exhilaration and fear that had thundered through his ears had propelled him to make a mad dash to collect the anchor rune. He hadn't slept for the weeks that had followed his flight from the capital, even with his full host of knights at his back. Godric had been on the verge of heart palpitations at the thought that Radon pursued him, and only gained his first night's rest upon reaching Stormvale. His body tensed as he was dragged into true slumber by unwelcome dreams. He found himself walking along a thorny path, his body much smaller than its current grafted edifice. Inclining his head, his dream self looked to the far horizon where the Erd tree stood proud at the end of the long and winding path. The gold of the capital, his dream self whispered in reverence, beginning his trek towards the great tree and the domes of Leandal at its foot. He could just hear the distant flutes ringing out over the plains. Oh, how he longed to return to the glimmering gold of the capital, to be accepted into the land of his BRTH far distant from this horrid castle. But I need power to get there. And as always with this dream in particular, Godric heard them begin to call the further he went along the path, quickening his pace to be past them, though his legs felt like they were sunken into mud. The sounds came in rustling sheets of noise, the cracking of small bones and squelch of gore, echoing up the path around him even as he broke out into a run. The silver-haired legacy did not need to turn his head to look at them, for they filled his peripheral vision in ever-encroaching waves. Arms. Millions, nay billions of severed arms flowed towards the thin strip of land that was the path he walked, each and every one moaning a distinctly morose keen, accusatory and miserable. They hated him, hated his weakness and what he had done to them. So with their owners long dead, the arms of those who had been crafted clawed their way towards the origin of their misery, who ran all the faster to be rid of them. It had all been a means to an end. That's what he told himself in the beginning when Melania, Canticarus Beach, had robbed him of his arm. Marika's BLD was too thin to let him grow in power as a demigod. He lacked the attunement or patience to be a sorcerer. And while he led a mighty host of knights, he lacked the logistical savantry to lead great armies. All that left him was the profane art of grafting. Profane? Nay, 'tis only right for those who rule to take from those who supplicate. Strength is squandered on the low-born when it could be pooled in those deserving, Godric raved, sure of himself even as he flew as fast as his atrophied little legs could carry him. Limgrave is mine, its limbs, mine. And I shall graft the lowliest pauper to the truest of dragons until my dominion takes us back to the Erd Tree. And as it had always been with every time he had been subjected to this abhorrent flight of fancy, Godric felt a hand lock around his ankle and send him tumbling, its vice-like grip making his bones creak. Leave me be. They did not. The tide of arms broke upon the Shah for the path and reached for him, pulling him inexorably towards their clawing embrace, kicking and screaming all the time, gripping the edge of the path with his fingers sinking into the dirt. Pathetic, a woman's voice said. Godric snarled. He had been waiting for this particular phantom to show up. She always did. Come to mock me? Or maybe take another arm, my rotted kin. A familiar pair of bone china legs filled his visage. Godric did not need to look up to know that a pale face adorned in winged helmet was sneering down at him. Godric the gilded, never golden. Silver of hair, yellow of belly. For all the limbs you gain, you are no closer to the capital and ever closer to your meager fiefdom being stripped from you. The specter of Melania said, though it had been so long since he had heard it, Godric could no longer say if it was hers or his own. The tide of limbs roared around him, clawing at his pristine body and digging cracked nails into alabaster flesh, drawing peals of agonized screaming and flesh from him in equal parts. A grubby hand, six-fingered and long, scratched at his face, its seeking digits looking to pluck his eyes from their sockets as they darted hither and thither. Abandon this path, Godric, lest you face an ignominious end as less than a man. Melania said leavely, voice cutting through Godric's screams much as her blade had done his flesh. Never! None shall take more from me than you already have, Godric snarled. A beat passed, and Godric did nothing but glare up at his oppressor as he had every other night, his body being twisted into a nightmarish schism of flesh. Oh, how he hated them all. So be it, Melania replied before her bone china foot whipped out, savagely kicking Godric in the face and sending him over the edge into the waiting sea of limbs. He screamed and screamed and screamed, the golden light of the distant capital snuffed from his vision, replaced by the endlessly undulating and clawing hands that dragged him ever downwards to their necrotic depths. As he fell, Godric felt a brief moment of lucidity settle upon his paranoia-addled mind, an awareness of just how far he had fallen to be tormented by his actions as he slept. But still, he wanted to see it just one more time, the golden light of the Erd Tree, and the gates of his home opening to welcome him back. Mayhap that would be a possibility, last of the traitorous WHR's bloodline. Godric gasped, his madness reasserting itself around his senses as he whipped his head left and right, searching to find the one that had spoken. He did not register until a few moments later that he was no longer lost in a sea of tortured and vengeful arms. No, now he floated aimlessly in a mist-filled darkness, with a single pinprick of golden light far above him. His eyes zoned in on the light as it grew in brightness, letting it wash over him as it resolved into a constellation of perfectly arrayed golden stars and nebulae high above him. It was the same color, he realized, that same brilliant gold light of the Erd Tree that he had once basked in so many years ago. Unbidden, he crooned wordlessly in delight at the splendor. Thou truly are a wretched little thing, so twisted away from my brilliance to that travesty of a form. Yet, even blunt instruments have their uses from time to time. What is this? Who speaks to me now? Godric demanded, only to feel a tremendous pressure slam down on him, flattening him against the floor of this quasi-realm. Mind thy tone, WHR's son. You speak to one so far beyond your comprehension. To know the truth would drive thee mad. Though truly thy mind is already that of a mendicant long before mine advent. The meanest demigod attempted to glare up at the gilded constellation before the stars glowed brighter, filling him with a feeling that he was trying the patience of something so much bigger than him. In a rare showing of humility, Godric inclined his head. The constellation seemed to like that if the celestial hum it emitted was anything to gauge. This wasn't over? This was far from over. But for now, he would listen. Thou seemed to grasp thy place at last, commendable little mendicant king. But how aware of you of thy enemies? Surely a king is wise. Biting down the curse that bubbled with vitriol at the back of his throat, Godric replied, I am surrounded on all sides by enemies. There is no end to them, but none dare to brace my fief. A warble of wry amusement passed through the cosmos. The projection of my most loyal servant appears to have slipped thy gaze then. But enough of that. I give unto you an omen most grave, mendicant king, bad tidings from the northwest." Godric watched in fitful silence as the still unnamed being gave its message, his lined face twisting into a sour expression. The northwest, Liurnia. But that made no sense. The waterlogged province had long been broken since before even the shattering. Yet his paranoia subsumed rational thought. What in the lakes challenges my fief? Instead of responding, a series of dust and stars began to swim within the golden nebulae, shifting in shapes and colors until it took on the smoky visage of a woman, tall, proud, and haloed by the moon. At her side was a young man with blonde hair and blue eyes, yet something was wrong with his image. Every few seconds it would flicker, briefly replaced by a faceless figure made of fire and starlight. This boy has returned the senses of the full moon queen in her seat of power. Thou knowest the ramifications. He felt his heart, transient in the dream, thundered loudly in his ears. Renala of the full moon, the head beach of his family's old allies and enemies. One who, at the peak of her power, had been able to stalemate mighty Radagon. Who could do something like that? The Witch Queen was mad since before the shattering. Yet sane she is, the blonde possesses 4 great runes, a fine prize for any king. Godric felt hunger in the pit of his stomach, but in his mind, he felt his paranoia coil and spit. With a sense restored, would Caria's queen rebuild her once grand host, bring it to bear against Stormvale and unseat him? No, he could not permit this. This will not stand, but how can I touch a MSTR of mystics? Very astute, mendicant king, for this alliance has a pair of weaknesses. The images changed, shifting until a pair of red-headed young girls appeared before him, one with gold eyes, the other sealed. This duo are loose ends. One a shard of the WHR, the other a miscalculation. But they are special to the two. Seek the girls before Rhea Lucaria builds its forces to dethrone you, and you shall have your prize. Without any warning, a beam of golden light blasted out of the nebula and struck Godric in the chest, sending streams of light through every vein as he screamed in pain, locking around and adding to the Achor rune grafted into his very soul. Squealing in agony, Godric soon found a feeling of mind, numbing power washing over him, filling every pore with golden brilliance. By the time he returned from the mix of agony and joy, he was no longer dreaming. Once more in his chambers with the of his golden axe clasped in his muscled 6-fingered hand. My lord. Godric looked up at the wall, seeing the green and red robes of one of his knights that he had pinned against the wall with the heavy head of his axe. He must have come to check up on him thrashing in his sleep, only for Godric to unconsciously attack him when he woke from the dream. Letting the knight drop to the floor and gasp for breath, Godric rose to his full height and barked out an order, still feeling this new power crackling within him. Muster the garrison, every single knight of Godric. All scions and finger-crawlers, corral the bears. We march for Rhea Lucaria and golden glory. Jogging through the halls of the academy, Naruto couldn't quite keep a grin from his face. There was no grand reason for its presence. If anything, the grin was no brighter than the one he usually wore while interacting with most people, but still, there was something decidedly amused about it. A dimple to his whiskered cheeks that said to the world at large, I am having fun, and if that annoys you, stuff it. The peal of laughter from above him cemented the reason for his merriment. Faster, Papa, faster. The blonde felt a pair of pudgy hands grip his thicket of yellow spikes harder, and a couple of short legs beat against his shoulders like a rider spurring their horse. As the little lady commands, he laughed said, increasing his pace to blur through the corridors as little more than a streak of blue, yellow, and plum. Melina let out a jubilant little whoop as they broke out onto one of the many steps of ascending structure, boards that made up the climbing levels of the academy. Naruto leapt from the steps and boosted himself off of the stone balustrade to slingshot the pair into the air. Freed from gravity's clawing embrace for but a moment, the duo enjoyed the feeling of the wind against their clothes in the bright light of day. Extending an arm, Naruto alighted them on one of the many spires that made up the rooftops of faculty buildings with nary a sound, hand locking around a solid hold while his feet stuck to the sheer angle with chakra. Quite the view, isn't it, little dove? Melina nodded excitedly atop his shoulders, preening at the name Naruto had taken to call her. It was a habit he had picked up from Renala after he had caught her referring to the seal-eyed Melina as Little Culver, a long and laborious task to decipher until the headmistress and queen had giggled and told him that it simply meant dove. She was about to say something when they both heard a tinkling sound on the edge of their hearing and turned to the west side of the academy, catching the visage of a large barrier of blue magic breaking down into shimmering dust. "Ooh, pretty." Naruto nodded, then unlatched the nearest window to let the pair inside the building once again. A lot of things had happened in the last few weeks, most interestingly that they had gained another houseguest. One of Renala's oldest and most fervent followers, a knight by the name of Moongrum, had returned to Rea Lucaria at the news that his queen had regained some measure of her sanity. According to the man himself, he had attempted to enlist a party of adventurers to uproot the traitorous scholars and other ne'er-do-wells that had taken the academy for themselves. Naruto winced at the memory of the old knight's face when Renala had told him that Naruto had succeeded in weeks where he had failed for years. Well, she put it in much nicer terms than that. But it hadn't stopped Naruto from feeling bad when Moongrum had knelt to him in thanks for bringing his queen's sense once again. At least he made fast friends with Bogart, probably the food. Kurama grumbled as Naruto and Melina exited out into the halls of this section of the academy, again on their hunt. Well, a hearty meal and good talk after decades of trying to protect someone is definitely a nice change of pace. I can hardly blame him, Naruto thought before pausing, ears pricking up. Do you hear that? The last Uzumaki felt his little charge look left and right, her head resting at the crown of his head, lifting a hand to cup her ear. Sounds like Millie? Melina questioned, hearing the muffled mumbling of a familiar little girl from down the hall. She looked down at Naruto in a childish approximation of an askance glance. We should see what's wrong. Nodding, the blonde was pleased by the altruistic tendencies that he had managed to instill in the little girl before they quietly crept through the halls until they came to the source of the annoyed grumblings. It was a corner room with the door ajar just wide enough for the pair to peek in without opening it any further. They instantly spied Millicent, sitting atop a desk clad in a dark blue dress that fit the little girl well, though it was clear to Naruto by its old creases that the dress had been in storage for a very long time. He noted that the redhead had a book open between her legs and was attempting to write something with a long feather quill, but the tells of her frustration were clear to him. The tips of her fingers were soaked in ink from where she had held the tip of the quill too tightly. The tendons in her hand stood out from the skin of her hand, close to a strain, and her face was screwed up in an annoyed grimace. It was honestly pretty cute to see, but Naruto knew that writing exercises when you weren't in the mood could tick you off something fierce. Empathy filled his chest, prompting him to push the door open. Millicent practically jumped out of her skin, snapping the book shut and inadvertently trapping one of her fingers inside of it. She winced in pain, but her gold eyes were locked on Naruto in embarrassment. No. Shhhhhhhhh. Naruto shushed her gently as he approached, holding out a waiting hand expectantly, his meaning clear. Suppressing a pout, Millicent slowly extended her ink-stained hand that had been caught in the book to rest in Naruto's much bigger palm. Blue eyes carefully assessed the little girl's hand. The ink-stained digits were nothing that a damp cloth couldn't fix, but her middle finger was throbbing quite fiercely, and the telltale swelling and darkening of a busted BLD vessel under her nail made him frown. Cupping her hand with his other palm, Naruto lifted the trio of limbs up to Millicent's mouth. Blow on them to make it feel better, he instructed in a calm voice, amused when he felt his shoulder-bound passenger lean forwards to watch in rapt attention. Come on, Renala might be the sorcerer, but it doesn't mean I can't work a little magic for someone who needs it. He encouraged the gold-eyed girl. Looking between the young adult and similarly aged little girl that rode him like a pony, Millicent raised an eyebrow before throwing caution to the wind and blowing lightly on the cupped hands. Her eyes widened when Naruto's hands began to glow with cool mint-colored light, sending a feeling of cool relief through her throbbing finger and making her sigh pleasantly. It lasted for a few seconds before Naruto drew his hands away from the now-healed finger. Better? Naruto asked, getting a thankful nod from Millicent before he pulled a rag from his back pocket and ran water-natured chakra into it, the cloth growing visibly moist in his hand. Setting about cleaning the ink from her fingers, Naruto asked, So you want to tell me what's got you in such a tiz, Millicent? Opening her mouth to speak, Millicent instantly closed it, cheeks puffing in cute embarrassment. I slipped away from the queen on what's the word? Errands? Gold eyes widened in realization. Errands! Yes, errands, she cheered before turning embarrassed once again. Naruto hummed in agreement, understanding why the little girl may have made a flight into the academy. It seemed that Renala had quite the shine for the girls and enjoyed keeping them close, but her current task was to those without the attunement to sorcery, which was quite dull. We couldn't work out how the scholars and others kept getting back into the academy, so Renala thought they might as well take down the entire set of defensive wards and put up new ones. Naruto thought, remembering the dissolving wall of blue light from earlier. Pulling away the wet rag, the displaced Uzumaki was happy to see that Millicent's hands were clean, nodding when she sent a thankful look his way. And I came here to do something, but I can't remember what. I keep trying to write it down, but my fingers won't do what I tell them to, and I just get so frustrated, Millicent griped, sounding to Naruto like an older woman attempting to articulate through a child's mind. Ha, what an oddly specific thought. Nah, it couldn't be that. After about a minute of calming down and pondering on what he could do to remedy this internal strife, a thought occurred to Naruto, quickly blooming into an idea that split his mouth in amusement. Say, Millicent, want to know what I do when I can't think straight? He asked, the little girl shaking her head in negative but curious. I like to pull a prank, set the mind at ease with some fun. Want to help me with that? Millicent looked unsure, but when Melina offered a hand and patted Naruto's other shoulder, she found herself accepting and being pulled onto Naruto's other shoulder, his singular grin soon morphing into a trio. It was about sunset when they had gathered the necessary materials for their improvised prank, and so it was as the iron-masked Bogart and helmless Moongrum, his long gray hair washed, found themselves walking to go feed the great crayfish that even now still served as Naruto's mount. The trio of pranksters watched from the shadows of the outer wall, Naruto hanging upside down and the pair affixed to him in a sling as the duo grew closer to the crayfish, large buckets of oats and fish in each arm. As they set the 2 buckets of feed down for the giant crawfish, they turned to go, only for Naruto to form a hand sign, a pulse of chakra setting in motion a series of events that the 2 girls watched in raptured attention. A tiny paper bomb with the strength of a firecracker exploded, dislodging a small, perfectly spherical iron that rolled down the stairs to strike a precisely laid series of stacked chairs, knocking loose a pithos containing cabbages. As the collection of green vegetables bounced down from the walls, the trio watched the male duo look around in confusion, unsure why it was now raining cabbages and oblivious to the submerged crisscrossing of ropes that they had backpedaled to stand on in their confusion. Seeing that their marks were now in the correct position, Naruto and the 2 children let out a cackle before taking hold of the rope affixed to their side, canceling the chakra flowing to his feet and dropping like a stone. As he pulled down on the rope, the rigged pulley that it ran through took up the slack and provided a sudden lift to the submerged ropes, snapping up in what was clearly a net that ensnared Moongrum and Bogart. The pair let out startled yelps as they were lifted into the air, trapped in the net, while Naruto tied off the rope and let them swing, dangling in front of the very confused crawfish that continued to eat its evening feed, its insectoid eyes blinking slowly. I don't think he likes his dinner. Girls, bit too much iron. Naruto chortled in amusement, enjoying the cackles of childish laughter from Melina and Millicent's much quieter but no less amused giggles. By the stars, what trickery is this? Moongrum called, struggling against the ropes. He let out a squawk of agitation when the crawfish poked the net inquisitively. It's that blonde bstrd, that's what. I knew this day had been too quiet. Bloody bad omen when that one is out and about, skulking cantankerously towards his devilish deeds, Bogart replied. Moongrum's trapped leg flailed and unintentionally kicked Bogart in the side of his iron mask. Oh, mind your legs. Naruto was about to untie the rope and lower the trapped duo to the ground when he registered movement out of the corner of his eye. A glimmering blue sword whizzed into view, spinning in a perfect arc to cut the rope and free the duo before returning from whence it had come in one fluid motion. Following it closely, Naruto watched as the energetic sword came to a shuddering stop, snatched out of the air by a pale hand where it dissolved back into a glintstone-tipped catalyst. Renala tapped her weapon of choice to the ground and surveyed the mess with a neutral gaze, her purple evening gown fluttering in the evening breeze. Spying the trio of pranksters, she tapped the staff's tip to the floor once, and her faithful red wolf trotted into the yard to approach them. I think that is quite enough tomfoolery for one day. You sweetings best get to your chambers for the night, she said slowly. The wolf gave a chuff of assent before padding over to the 2 young girls and picking the both of them up by the scruffs of their dresses, lifting them away and out of sight, leaving just Naruto to look sheepishly at his host. Rennala tutted once and planted a fist against her hip. "I would have words with thee." Naruto winced. "All right. Did I do something wrong?" "Not as such, no. I merely wish to talk." The pair of Moongrum and Bogart made strangled noises of offense, but Naruto paid them no mind, silently falling into step with Rennala, who turned and began to slowly walk through the tiered stairs of the academy. A cool evening breeze rustled past them as they walked, idly discussing the nature of the little prank that Naruto and the kids had pulled. She wasn't angry as such, just a little ruffled that their absence for the majority of the day was over something so trifling. Naruto caught himself looking at Rennala as she led the way, eyes lingering on the sway of her hips in that silky purple evening gown, the wind turning that silky material into a sea of stars that he found himself drawn to. She turned to face Naruto by the time that they had reached the doors to the headmistress's apartments, her body caught in half-profile, revealing a full-length view of Rennala's figure from the tips of her inkai black hair to toned legs showing through the gown. A lump formed at the back of Naruto's throat, aware that he was staring. Much as he wished he could write it off as just some inopportune lighting or wind, making him feel embarrassed, deep down, he had to admit something to himself. He liked Rennala. He found her quiet moments and beauty very attractive, and despite how often he had derided the people of the lands between for speaking nonsensically, he found it quite strong to express his slowly building feelings for the full moon queen. Rennala smirked, her painted lips curling in amusement. An unsaid caught you lingering unsaid in the air as she led him inside and up the stairs towards her personal chambers. I don't think I've ever seen her room before, he thought. His steps needed to be swift to keep up with a tall woman's stride. They soon came to a pair of tall oaken doors that Rennala pushed open. Taking a moment to survey the room, Naruto found it to be very fitting for Rennala. A wide open expanse that was cluttered on one side with dozens of bookshelves and a large vanity mirror. The fading light of sunset pouring into the room from expansive panoramic windows and a balcony. Walking along the wall, Naruto paused, noticing a large poster sitting pride of place in the center of the wall, its canvas yellowed and aged, but its occupants still visible. 5 figures, 2 seated on thrones and 3 standing behind. A giant of a man in lion-themed armor with a jovial smile poking out from his red hair. A regal man with a beard and crown, his face serious but stance relaxed. A young girl with red hair and golden eyes, and seated in a pair of thrones, a tall red-headed man in armor and kilt, while the other was Rennala. "Hun? Oh, that old thing," Rennala said, setting down her catalyst by the bed to join him in front of the painting. "'Tis something commissioned many scores ago, long before the shattering, both of the ring and—" She trailed off, heavy emotion swimming in her face. Naruto grimaced before his face softened, extending a hand to touch Rennala on the shoulder, but she pulled away too quickly. "Come, I have something to give you," the woman said, bustling over to a desk where a long wooden box sat waiting. As Naruto slowly crossed the room to join her, he saw that it was affixed with a brass latch that Rennala brushed undone, then stepped back. Lifting a hand, Naruto slid his thumb into the groove of the long wooden box and was presented with resistance. No one has opened this thing for ages, he realized, bringing a second hand to bear, bracing the lid and slowly prizing it up with a tortured whine of age-hardened dust and solid hinges rendered immobile from centuries of disuse. At last, with a distinct pop, the lid came open and revealed its treasure for all to see. A strange feeling washed over Naruto, emanating from the box, something familiar yet alien to what he knew, tickling his memories as his eyes adjusted to the gloom. It was a sword. But not just any sword, it was an odachi. Perhaps 5.5 feet in length, the curved weapon had a long, 2-handed handle wrapped in long white bandages of linen over a black, flower-shaped guard. It rested in a similarly adorned sheath with 2 brass fittings at its fulcrum from which a sheath was connected. Resting undisturbed upon the velvet, it was sunk into. Rennala broke the silence as he stared at the sheathed weapon. "The stories thou hast told me of thy homeland paint a picture of something wonderful, so different from the lands between. And as thee did, I could not help but recall this old thing." The two shared a stare before Naruto gently lifted the long blade from its resting place. That odd foreboding yet comforting feeling vibrated up his arm before he rested this thumb beneath the guard, and, after a moment, popped it open an inch. A silent wind whispered out from the blade, revealed to be as black as a starless night with a name written on it in kanji. Kaiman. Naruto stared at the small section of the blade for a moment, compelled to draw its entire length from the sheath before thinking better of it and resetting it within the sheath, letting out a breath he did not know he had been holding in. Where the heck did something like this even come from? It's not like any of the swords I've seen samurai here wield. Many centuries ago, when there was still a channel between Liurnia and the seas, a ship ran aground with nary a soul aboard save for the poor beggar that lashed himself to the wheel. In the hold was nothing but this sword, many who called it cursed. As the greatest sorcerers in the land, it was given to the stewards of Caria for safekeeping. Rennala explained, taking a seat on her bed. I felt it appropriate to give to one so far removed from his own world. But why give it to me? I'm no swordsman. That was always more of Sasuke's deal. Naruto wondered, holding the sheathed odachi in his offhand. He sensed a change in Rennala's emotions at that moment, a bubbling mix of self-hate and worry that did not suit her appealing face. There is a tradition in my family, a symbolism to the gifting of a sword from woman to man, to arm one to defend the other. Something I have done only once before. Her eyes drifted to the painting on the wall, shame filling them when she saw the redhead seated on the throne, looking away as if scolded. Rennala. It's a silly thing, isn't it? The heart. So easy to break and easier still to lead you on fool's errands. Rennala chuckled in self-deprecation, resting her chin upon the palm of her hand. Until recently, I was but a raving lunatic. I likely still am. But you have given me the lucidity to decide my fate from here on out. It is only right that her words faltered, a glitter of unshed tears in her eyes. I truly am a witch, aren't I? To covet something new while still mourning for that which I have lost. I would repulse anyone, unworthy as I am. Slowly, Naruto took a step towards Rennala, who closed her eyes as her shoulders began to shake. Radagon, he left me with little more than a word. Radon and Rykard, driven mad by actions their own and others, and little Ranni, every time I see Millicent, I can't help but see the daughter I lost. Naruto stood before her, silently setting Kaiman down next to Rennala's catalyst. The queen hiccuped, and yet still my heart wants, while knowing that you will never. Naruto slowly took hold of Rennala's chin and tipped it up, her eyes flying open to stare into his deep blue orbs, glittering with gold stars in the candlelight. He held her there for a second before gingerly leaning forwards and gently pressing his lips to hers. Her eyes widened, shocked into silence from the action before she slowly reciprocated, their lips meshing together until they found a rhythm, no words passing between them until, at some unsaid signal, they pulled apart, drew back now, his pink lips only inches from to her painted red ones. Now it was Naruto's turn to speak, and when he did, the world listened. I'm not going to pretend that I know absolutely everything you've been through, but I know what it's like to lose everything, and how sometimes you feel that you don't deserve to have joy if you think you've failed. These things I know. What I also know is, I care about you. I don't know if that is love or simple attraction, if my heart races to see you smile from lights flashing in my head or some great cosmic plan. But as it stands, we have no room for what we don't know and do, only that we will find out. Maneuvering around her, Naruto sat on the bed beside Rennala and offered no complaint when the older woman rested her head on his shoulder. We are not puppets. We will not dance to the strings of unseen gods. We are the MSTR of our fate, the captains of our souls, and if you longing to seek comfort from me and I of you, we do so because we are better because of it, not worse. No more dancing on strings. We can choose to be better. No, we must be better. For the sake of our children. The pair slowly but surely tilted back on the four-poster bed, content at each other's closeness. They were both unsure where this would lead them, but they would try to make it work. So they swore. Whatever blissful sleep had been delivered onto the pair was short-lived as Naruto was awoken to the sound of a fist thundering against the door to Rennala's door. Blinking in confusion and reaching up to wipe the sleep from the corners of his eyes, Naruto noticed that it was still the dead of night outside, the light of the full moon pooling at the foot of the bed through the balcony. It took him a second to remember the situation that had brought him to this unfamiliar place, a realization that crashed to the fore of his mind when he felt someone shift beside him on the bed. Rennala sat up slowly, still clad in her purple evening dress, her hair a little messy but no less appealing in the light of her namesake. Naruto felt his cheeks darken when he noticed that he was staring and swung his legs over the end of the bed, mentally checking over his own clothes in a panic. Keep your panties on, you just fell asleep next to each other, Almost disgustingly vanilla, if you ask me, Kurama's low voice warbled in wry amusement. Naruto sighed in relief, then his brows knit together into a thick line. What do you mean disgustingly vanilla? Instead of rising to Naruto's provocation, Kurama's response was delivered with complete seriousness. That can wait, there is something foul at the front gate. Knowing not to mistrust his partner when he was being serious, Naruto rose from the bed, stooping to pick up the sheath kamen by its strap, turning to address Rennala as his own negative emotion sensing confirmed what Kurama felt. There's something at the front gate. In the dead of night? The raven-haired queen replied, eyes narrowing as she too rose to her feet, whatever embarrassment she may have felt about the last few hours banished in favor of pragmatism. With a gesture, her catalyst rose from the floor and flew into her hand. Not wasting any time, the pair strode to the chamber door and opened it, revealing a frantic Moongram who was only half-dressed, his clothes a mess of mail and cloth. Probably hadn't had time to pull his clothes on in a hurry to get here. What ails ye, loyal Moongram? Rennala asked in a clipped voice. Knights at the gate, my queen, a host of them by my measure. Moongram wheezed out, his breath coming in shallow gasps. He must have run from the gatehouse all the way to the top of the academy to tell them. I tried to find Sir Naruto, but oh, his eyes alighted on the blonde who stood behind the tall queen. I see. Naruto ignored the urge to look at his shoes at the telling note in the old knight's words, but Rennala took it in stride. What do these knights seek? Rennala took the moment that Moongram used to catch his breath to wave her hand through the air, looking progressively more annoyed, then muttered about taking the defensive wards down under her breath. They're asking for your presence as well as the immediate surrender of what they demand. And what are they asking for? Naruto asked, feeling a cloying anticipation crawl up from the small of his back. Moongram grimaced. The children. For a fraction of an instant, less than a shadow of a moment, Naruto caught something in the corner of Rennala's eyes, framed in half-profile from where he stood. Fury. Abject, righteous and insane fury. It was gone as soon as it had appeared, but Naruto had seen it. He was much the same. He felt his hands snap into fists and killing intent flowing off him in waves, and it was only the taller woman's following words that got him back on track. Moongram, Rennala ordered, strengthening up to her full height over the elderly knight. Find Bogart and the Sweetings and see them to the shelter beneath the main lecture hall. If anything comes through that is not us, cut it to scarlet and crimson. I would know the identity of mine foes by the stains you leave on their clothes. Naruto felt a blonde brow rise to his hairline at the steely order, looking at Rennala even as Moongram snapped off a sharp blow and sprinted off into the academy. Are you okay? He asked the woman quietly. Rennala faced Naruto with a surprisingly cruel smile, though the emotion was not directed at him. Yes, Naruto, for the first time in a long time. Naruto held her look before nodding, thumping a fist to the palm of his hand. Then let's see who's knocking on our door. Rennala preened, enjoying the sound of R before snapping her fingers, her body covered in a shroud of glowing blue particles. But first, permit me to get dressed for the occasion. In no time at all, the pair strode towards the gatehouse with purpose, now hearing the furious banging at the wooden doors that stood up to the abuse valiantly. Naruto mainly appeared the same, save for the fact that he had strapped kamen across his back. He was nowhere near tall enough to have the longsword anywhere near his waist. Rennala, on the other hand, was a sight to behold, donning a crushed velvet royal blue coat trailing to her knees that was jacquarded with gilded representations of constellations across its shoulder pads. Under this was a figure-hugging tunic in red adorned in glintstone with small tassets at her waist, matching the pair of gauntlets that seamlessly melded with her frilled cuffs. Her lower body sported a pair of slightly puffed breeches tucked into gleaming black riding boots, prioritizing movement. She accessorized the ensemble with a dark blue and red shoulder cape affixed to her right shoulder, and a more functional version of her crown sat atop her head. Able to hear voices clearly now, Naruto gave a sharp whistle and was unsurprised to see Radagon's red wolf bound in to walk beside them, his eyes dilated and furs standing on end. He knew enemies were at hand as the trio arrived at the front gates of the academy. Come on out, a mighty fist banged against the door. We know who you are. More importantly, we know what you are. No need for this to get bloody. Just give us the girls and... The door slammed open and smacked them in the face, sending them sprawling into their fellows. Down they went, clutching their bloody nose. Naruto loomed over them, eyes blazing like twin coals in his skull. Bit late for that. The blonde looked over those that stood before them, jaw set in a firm grimace. Camped out in front of the gatehouse was a host of perhaps 300 of varying sizes and shapes. The majority of them were obviously knights, adorned in orange and green surcoats featuring the twin sigils of the Erd tree and a lion in addition to chipped plate helms with plumes. The majority of them carried heavy brass-colored tower shields with either pitted greatswords or weathered partisans. They had seen better days, but owing to the fact that the knights made up 2/3 of the enemy force, his eyes and ears picked up far more piteous creatures standing against them. "So these are the grafted that Bogart told me about," Naruto ground out, spying scores of patchwork men, great hulks of mismatched limbs grafted haphazardly to putrefying flesh, their hands wrapped around assortments of weapons. "They're disgusting." While many had talked about the horrifying nature of grafted scions or the skittering finger crawlers that even now watched them from the edges of the formation, Naruto could feel their true nature, and it disgusted him. All of them were nothing more than lingering vestiges of what once might have been called human, many of them having their souls worn away to simple beasts piloting twisted bodies at the whim of bestial rage magnified for every mutated limb that had been crudely grafted to their bodies. They even brought their dogs. How quaint. Kurama commented macabrely, the titanic forms of truly massive rune bears held at bay by chains lashed to tamed finger crawlers, clawing at the ground in frustration and looking for a scrap. Naruto eyed the surroundings before taking a deep breath and calling out across the lakes, "I'm only gonna say this once. Leave this place. We've no quarrel with you." "Oh, I'm pretty sure we do." The sea of knights slowly parted to admit the one who had spoken, a tall and misshapen figure that limped more than walked. His body was disproportionately proportioned compared to his seemingly small head with its mane of lank silver hair. He was swathed in a moldering green set of robes that barely contained his bulk, a tarnished gold circlet around his head that failed to glint in the light of the moon. Rennala stared at the enemy leader before she let out a gasp of realization. "Godric, is it truly you?" The sound of chipped and broken teeth grinding together reached Naruto's ears. Godric's voice was hoarse to listen to. "Be silent, Pretender Queen. We have come to nip your insurrection in the bud before it begins." Rennala balked. "Insurrection? And they call me mad. We have no quarrel with you or your knights." Naruto held up a hand to halt the conversation. "Crank it back a notch, big guy. No one's looking for a fight." Godric leveled a glare at Naruto, and the blonde saw for the first time that the interloper's eyes glowed with a golden internal light, a familiar shade of gold that put him on edge. "Hold thy tongue, neophyte, lest your queen rip it from you for insulting an honored lord. I am Godric, heir to the golden lineage and lord of all that is golden." Naruto's jaw snapped shut in chagrin. He had never been fond of these types. "And what, God DCK, brings you out here in the middle of the night when we were trying to sleep?" Scowling, Godric shifted his robes and allowed a sizable golden axe to emerge from within moth-bitten cloth, the arm far too long to belong to a normal human. In fact, Naruto could spot at least 4 separate biceps had been grafted together to affix it to his mangled elbow. He slammed the weighted axe head into the waterlogged ground with a splash. "Do not pretend. Thou art gathering great runes in this heretical bastion of magic. You intend to take Limgrave from me," Godric raved, the glow in his eyes growing brighter. Rennala nearly guffawed outright, then caught herself. "What nonsense is this? I would never do such a thing." "No, no, 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 no." The misshapen madman stomped his feet like some towering toddler. "You don't get to speak, witch. I am the BLD of your betters. Give unto me the 5 great runes and the children, and I might consider letting you walk away." He ended with a leering chuckle that instinctively made Naruto step in front of Rennala. "Do you have things handled here?" he asked, not turning to face the Carrion Queen. "I'm gonna teach tall, green and gormless here some manners." Her reply was quick as it was without pity. "Worry not for me. I only ask that you return in one piece." Naruto grinned. He launched himself forwards with such force that the ground cratered under him, a shockwave blasting in his wake as he threw himself at the crowned Cretan. Drawing his fist back, Naruto moved it forwards in a blindingly fast straight punch, hoping to catch the legacy of Godfrey in the chest. The thin BLD demigod widened his eyes, and, with a dexterity that Naruto did not think he possessed, managed to maneuver the weighted head of his golden axe into the path of Naruto's fist at the last possible moment. Naruto's punch struck with the force of a charging bull, sinking into the gilded steel of the axe and driving its heft into Godric. The meanest demigod was obviously unprepared for such a ferocious attack and doubled over around the hit before physics asserted itself, sending him blasting backwards at breakneck velocity. He knocked several dozen of his knights and scions flying into the air as he pirouetted backwards through the air, flying over the shallow lake's surface. Snarling, he attempted to right himself in the air, but Naruto was already upon him again, sprinting across the surface of the water faster than Godric flew. He leapt again into the air above the demigod and delivered a kick to the jaw that propelled Godric further away from the academy and towards the ruins of a sunken building. The silver-haired scion collided with the moss-covered edifice at terminal velocity, reducing it to shards of jagged masonry and timber. His flight barely slowed. Naruto did not let up on this initial assault, determined to get the green-clad enemy as far away from the walls and, thus, the children as possible. Appearing below the axe-wielding wheel of cloth, Naruto let a Rasengan swirl into life in his hand, the vortex of chakra glowing before move it at the still airborne opponent. Much to his surprise, Godric twisted in the air and divested himself of his moldy green cloak, which flapped before Naruto's eyes and obscured his view. Molding chakra inside his lungs quickly, Naruto spat out a bullet of air that ripped the cloak to shreds, only for there to be no sight of his opponent. Hearing a mighty yell, Naruto reacted and faced the noise, his Rasengan catching the blade of Godric's golden axe and grinding against it for a moment before the spiraling sphere detonated, knocking his enemy away to skip across the water like a stone. Sandal-clad feet touched down upon the surface of the water and stood atop it, while Godric landed in an unceremonious heap amidst the mud and water. As his opponent got to his feet, using the golden axe to lever himself up like a cane, Naruto got his first full glimpse at Godric's body. His body was a patchwork of many different types of flesh and muscle, with legs like tree trunks and a chest as broad as Naruto was tall. He could clearly distinguish the crude stitches and iron staples that affixed Godric's neck to the body, the flesh of the head and chest, two completely different colors. Then there were the arms, at least a dozen of them grafted across the man's shoulders and back with more connected to his elbows. Watch one of them taken from a different person, but all of them armed. Some held great swords or smaller axes, others had flails and hammers, and one even held some form of WHP. And in the center of it all was the glowing concentric circles of a great rune in the heart of his chest. Godric sneered at Naruto, gasping for air. Compared to the blonde who was breathing evenly, he looked a right mess, but the golden light in his eyes was growing stronger, the pulse from the rune quicker. "How dare you strike me? I bid thee kneel, gobshite." Naruto grimaced before cracking his neck. "You're no lord of mine. To be honest, it hurts to even look at you." SCK in air through his teeth, Godric took hold of the heft of his axe with both primary arms and once again slammed it into the ground. "Forefathers one and all, bear witness," he exclaimed, and to Naruto's surprise, a small vortex of golden light and energy began to fountain from the axe head, pushing back the water. Cracking his neck in response, Naruto felt the comforting feeling of chakra circulate through his coils before forming a Rasengan in each hand and ran towards Godric. He was confident that he could win without a scratch, but got the feeling this abomination would go kicking and screaming. Far distant from the developing situation at Rhea Lucaria, Ranni the witch sat in deep thought, her four mannequins' hands steepled and tapping out a hollow tune against one another. She had been slowly listening to reports from Blade these last few days about his observing her mother and the blonde interloper that had apparently restored her mother's sanity. "Truly?" Ranni tilted her head. "He's taken in a second child, you say? You did well to report this. Mind shadow," she thought to herself, dimly aware of her surroundings. Her shadow and servant stories of the goings-on in her old home painted a bizarre, but not entirely unappealing image. She found herself curious, but curiosity was tempered by caution. What manner of madman had Mother taken into her home? She wanted to see. She wanted to know. She felt a familiar tug at the back of her conscience that she knew to be Blade calling upon her to deliver a report. Offering no resistance, she allowed a portion of her caution to be drawn along the line of sorcery until she was sure that she was in two places at once. In her mind's eye, she could all but see the statuesque form of her great wolfen servant looking quite comical, holding up her doll to his face to speak. But that humor quickly faded upon seeing the worried look on the lupine maw. "Sweet Blade?" she questioned. Why do you call upon me at this hour? Has something happened? Aye, a great many things and none of them good, Blade replied, his tone tense. She could make out his ears flapping in a fight or flight response. Speak then, and tell me of the calamity that I fear you hold for me. The wolf man's face grimaced. Godric the Grafted has laid siege to Rhea Lucaria with his entire host, at least 5 scores from what I can see. Ranni shot bolt upright in her little wooden throne. What business does that ignominious kin of mine have attacking? Speak plainly, sweet Blade. I need details, she barked in a rare, unladylike decisiveness. Chuffing at the order, Blade answered as concisely as he could. Haven't the faintest clue what possessed the Lord of Grafting, but their forces laid siege at midnight. They've yet to breach the castle walls, nor will they any time soon if the blonde and your mother have anything to say about it. My mother is on the field? Aye, and making mincemeat of Godric's knights with your father's blasted red hound. The blonde faces Godric one-on-one, but it's strong to see what is going on from, he trailed off, looking over his shoulder as a boom shook his surroundings. From what? Ranni watched the armored wolf give the lupine analog for a sheepish grin. From all the explosions when they clash. Taking a deep, if unneeded, breath to steady her thoughts and emotions, Ranni ran through her options before finally concluding on what she wanted to do. She gave Blade a shrewd look before speaking. Blade, aid them in battle. Our intervention is long overdue. Blade nodded instantly before drawing his greatsword and hefting it to his shoulder. Ranni let the connection to the doll fade seconds later. Silence reigned in the tower for a minute before Ranni silently rested her face in her hands. When the retinue of the Grafted had first stepped foot into Liurnia to march for the distant academy, none of them could have foreseen the figurative meat grinder they were marching into. While those of them that still clung to sanity were keenly aware that they weren't at the top of the food chain, they were confident enough in the task that their lord had presented to them. After all, they were an entire host of knights with support from the Grafted, and even brought with them their war beasts. What hope could a mad woman and a vagabond have to oppose them? At least, that was how Rennala interpreted the confused wail that had emerged from the night before her when she had blown a fist-sized hole in his chest, stepping aside to allow him to clatter into the quickly growing pile of corpses, dead before he hit the ground. Sweeping her catalyst through the air, she formed a half-dozen magical sigils in the air from which teal-colored lightning crackled in challenge at a team of knights that attempted to rush at her with their swords and partisans held high. The sigils glowed before discharging their payloads, electricity arcing across the surface of the water and hitting 5 of the less familiar foes, the 6th smart enough to jump clear of the water, and was thus spared the cruel fate of his fellows. The 5 knights came to shuddering stops, lightning crackling from the inside of their armor, sending them into spasms and pain screams, the smell of cooked meat wafting from their now smoking forms. They would not suffer for very long. Rennala formed a spectral greatsword that was twice as long as she was tall, its length a gleaming pale blue. The sword whipped horizontally with such speed that it seemed to be weightless, bifurcating the 5 stunned invaders through their waists, their innards spilling out to stink sourly in the night. The 6th knight, obviously more experienced than his brothers, avoided this fate and charged at the queen, using his gilded tower shield to block one of her arcane bolts. The force behind the attack was still strong enough to break his stride, so his follow-up partisan move was weak. Rennala caught the arrow-shaped head with her catalyst, and, with a flick of her wrist and pulse of blue light, sent it to bang into the tower shield with a chime. The light ran down from the catalyst along the partisan and into the shield, feelers of arcane brilliance reaching out to snag the remnants of magic from her initial spell bolt and rearranging them on the inside of the shield. She spied the look of confused, then terrified eyes through the thin visor of his helm, having seen a magical circle take form on the inside of his shield, likely knowing it was too late. A dozen thick, half-meter-long glintstone spikes formed on the inside surface of the shield, mangling the knight's arm who desperately attempted to unlatch it. He did not expect Rennala's boot to stamp down on the shield, sending all the spikes into his torso and nailing the tower shield to his chest, causing him to crumple limply into the muck. Rennala took a deep breath, surveying the battlefield. It had been some time since she had walked the field of battle, since she had hung up her arms to be a teacher rather than a warrior of arcane might. She knew she was diminished compared to the young woman from so long ago, but as the queen looked into the scared faces of these knights and the way they shook, she knew something to be true. They are no warriors of Radagon. I did not fall to the Erd tree once, nor will these vagabonds make me consider the prospect again, she thought, eyeing a grafted scion that stepped forwards. Throw down your arms, witch queen, we seek supplication, not bloodshed, the scion yelled, surprisingly composed given his otherwise mad body. Blue eyes narrowed to flinty chips of ice. The nerve of this thing. A distant explosion drew her attention. Far away, in the heart of the lakes, she could see great towers of water, exploding upwards like geysers, glints of gold and blue in their heart. Naruto battled with Godric, and from her measure, he was giving the ill-bred little sirree a proper thrashing. To protect the children, their home. Rennala felt her blood warm at the sight. More so at what followed. With an icy face and boiling blood, she took a step off the entry rampart onto the surface of the lake, walking atop the water, not unlike the miraculous ability of the distant shinobi. You come to my home with friction and strife. You demand supplication to your beggar of a lord and ask I hand over those children who seek succor in my halls. Rennala stepped forwards, and the enemies stepped back in trepidation, her catalyst snapping to a ready stance at her side. And yet now as we resist, as my guardian gives your lord a drubbing that his mother should have given him long ago, as I rend your fellows to mulch, now you ask for no bloodshed. Raising the catalyst before her face, she fixed the multitude with a deadly stare. On my name as Rennala, full moon queen of Caria, head mistress of Rhea Lucaria and greatest foe of Radagon of the Golden Order, hear my words. A large white magical circle emerged from her feet, glowing brightly and giving Rennala an unearthly quality. None of you shall leave this place alive. That was enough for many of the more cowardly members of the retinue. They threw down their weapons and turned on their heels, beating a speedy retreat across the lakes with their tails between their legs. A red blur caught them before they had any time to notice, let alone react. A spectral golden sword corkscrewed along the lines of fleeing troops, a furred sickle threshing wheat. Limbs and head went flying to sink into the water and muck by the time, the blur stilled enough for the host to see the red wolf of Radagon leaning down to bite the throat out of a now legless brother. The wolf looked up at the group, gore and odor dripping from its long fangs, before giving a chilling howl and launched a barrage of glintstone comets into their backline. The wolf was more a sheepdog than a wolf in that instant, running down any of the regiment that dared run and driving what was left towards Rennala like lambs to the slaughter. The scions let out fearful roars as reality set in, clanking their shields and announcing their curses. Finger-crawlers and rune-bears were slipped from their reins and charged at the queen, intent on ripping her to pieces. Come, oath-sworn dragon, Rennala intoned, driving the bladed tip of her catalyst into the magic circle at her feet. A tide of white-blue motes of light surged around her before taking the form of a large spectral dragon that roared in challenge at the sprinting enemies. It charged to meet them, the muscles of its sinewy neck and tail whipping left and right to send knights and scions away in broken masses of flesh and metal. 2 rune bears attempted to claw and bite at the dragon, but their attacks did very little to its semi-corporeal nature, though the same could not be said for them when in a show of surprising speed, the dragon's clawed hand struck out to pick up one of the bears while pinning the other under its foot. The bear roared at the dragon valiantly, but was silenced when the dragon's own deafening roar overpowered it, then locked its jaws around its upper body and bit it clean in half, the other half falling to crush a finger-crawler. Seeing its fellow so utterly destroyed, the other rune bear under the dragon's foot let out a mournful call and redoubled its efforts to escape the spectral reptile's hold. Its efforts would be for naught. The dragon opened its mouth and breathed scolding blue fire down upon the bear, cooking it instantly and angled the stream to cremate anything before it. Rennala took no pleasure in the death of the beasts, but she certainly enjoyed driving glintstone comets into the hearts and brains of every single grafted that shambled in her direction. Jumping into the air, she glided over the battlefield, raining down lunar hellfire upon the knights and other abominations that Godric had brought to her home. Some brave or foolish souls attempted to snipe her from the air with arrows, but she either swatted them aside or briefly let her body dissolve into mist to let them pass through her. Ye who think that you can take more from me than I have already lost, quail under my moon, Rennala shouted, high above the battlefield, raising her catalyst above her head and channeling the totality of her magic. Far above her formed a dense orb of magic, quickly solidifying into the pitted surface of the moon. Sweeping her arm down, the man-sized representation of Luna fell upon the battlefield with a terrifying slowness, just long enough to make those still alive think that they may have had a chance to outrun it. When it hit the ground, the entire battlefield was enveloped in a blast of white light. The cavern shook above Selen as she sprinted through it. Oh dear, she was fairly certain the entire academy must have been felt that last attack. Selen winced. Nope, not getting involved in that madness. Whoever those fools were, they'd serve as an adequate distraction, but she wanted no part in that insanity. Initially, she had watched on with idle curiosity as the band of knights had trekked across the lakes towards the academy, wondering what could bring them there. She had initially theorized that they may have been seeking to petition goods and supplies before embarking on the trek to Caelid and the Radon Festival, but the moment battle had broken out, that theory had guttered and died. And much as the sorceress hated to admit it, so too had her hopes of beating the Full Moon Queen in a straight-up battle of sorcery. At least I was able to glimpse the power of the blonde interloper. Now all I have to do is work out how his sorceries function. Ugh, perspective Selen, one prize at a time. She still maintained her longing to understand just what the mystery behind Naruto and his abilities was, but the fact that both the distraction and the fact that Rennala had taken down the wards was too good a prospect to pass up. She was too proud to admit that it was greed that spurred her sprint through the secret tunnels in the cistern beneath the academy, determined to make her way to the main library and plunder its secrets while still undefended. This was her best chance to do so, and it would be foolish not to take it. The sound of fierce combat was all but muted by the time her masked form came to the large oaken doors to the library, bracing both arms against them to press them open. "Oh, the mysteries you hoarded for yourself, you maddened old bint," Selen seethed, walking into the towering rows of books. There was so many to choose from, so much stockpiled knowledge that she was found herself spoiled for choice. It's not fair at all. Passing from one shelf to another, she picked several books before tossing them to the floor, not satisfied as there was always something better. If she was going to bring back a trophy, then it would be something extraordinary. But the issue was that all knowledge was sacred. Hidden eyes caught a glint in the shadows, and Selen paused, entirely taken off guard. A dull glow emanated from the far corner of the library, markedly different from the glintstone she was used to. This light was an orange gold. Approaching the glow with cautious steps, the sorceress lifted her hands to remove her helmet, revealing a narrow, pretty face with icy blue eyes and a bob cut of feathered black hair. "What have you hidden here for me to find?" Selen whispered, crouching low. Whatever it was had been haphazardly shoved into the bottom, most rung of one of the many bookshelves and covered with a dusty gray cloth. But its light glowed through the threadbare material, glowing brighter the closer she got to it. Pulling it aside, Selen let out a shocked gasp at the sight of a familiar golden egg of crystal. It was Rennala's great rune. But what on earth was it doing here? Common sense told the aspirant sorceress that this made no sense, that she should simply leave the egg where it lay and seek some other prize. Alas, greed again forced her hand. Slowly she reached up and picked up the great rune to inspect it, holding it up to the light to see how it refracted the world through its surface. To think that this was a crystallization of a very rule of the world. Oh, the things she could do with this, the power, prestige and knowledge from the study alone would take her decades to come into, but it was worth it. Another explosion rocked the academy, this one much stronger and much closer to home. Realizing that she may well have overstayed her welcome, Selen made to use a cantrip to hide away the rune in a pocket space before making her flight to the cisterns once again. She did not consider for a moment why Rennala had hidden the rune so mundanely, nor what interaction with the simplest of magics would cause. The egg began to grow hot in Selen's hands, its interior light growing incandescent until she could no longer hold the thing, dropping it to the marble floor. "Blast," she muttered, looking at her scalded hands only to notice that whatever burns had been created had also been healed. Her narrow face turned quizzical, and she looked at the egg for a moment too long. It let out a pulse of light before tongues of golden-orange light emerged from its corporeal form before surging towards Selen. She hastily attempted to conjure a barrier, but the rune's energies punched through it like a brick through a plate-glass window. She could only offer a curse-filled tirade as the energy WHP took hold of her and gently lifted her into the air, enshrining her in a golden sphere that grew thicker with each passing second. "No, this is new woo-woo," she screamed, feeling the energies of the rune penetrating her body and soul. She thrashed as much as she could, banging feverishly upon the golden walls of her prison even as they turned opaque, warmth rushing through her body as her clothes seemed to grow larger around her. Before unconsciousness claimed her, overwhelmed by the warm light and feeling of terrifying bliss that began to unmake her from the inside out, Sorceress Selen realized something. This was not a prison, this was a womb. The globe of golden light hung suspended in the air above the library for some time until, with no warning, it began to slowly break down into motes of golden light and dust. A Rhea Lucaria uniform was gently lowered to the ground to rest upon a bed of warm golden particles. After a minute, a small lump began to move inside the robes until, with a lethargy of BRTH, a young girl's hand poked from the fabrics, slowly at first, then with an all-too-familiar panic, sharp, uneven breaths filling the halls of the otherwise silent in the library. The silence stretched on a moment longer. Longer now, longer still. At last, a tiny plaintive voice filled the void. Why is everything bigger? It was too much. Panic had its say. Her eyes rolled in her head, and she passed right out. Had Renala been present, she would have laughed herself silly. 'Twas a most fitting punishment for her former student. Gold and blue clashed under the light of the moon. Naruto matched Godric blow for blow regardless of his array of misshapen limbs and weapons. Sidestepping a golden windstorm sent his way, Naruto got in close, slid under the wide sweep of the main war axe, and let his momentum carry him over the surface of the water. A tertiary arm cracked a WHP at Naruto, but instead of dodging, the Uzumaki let it coil around his arm before performing an yukimi on a fallen tree. Shooting into the air, the arm's hold on the WHP held just as Naruto had wanted it to, arcing him into the air behind Godric before yanking the line tight. Naruto lanced towards the legacy of gold, slamming both feet into his opponent's back in a dropkick that sent Godric face first into the muck with a pained grunt. Not content with grounding the enemy, Naruto took hold of the WHP-bearing arm and yanked it, overextending it until it was taut, then using his foot to stamp on the elbow, breaking it with a wet crunch. A war hammer swung at his midsection, so he disengaged and backflipped to get distance from Godric, who stood back up with a roar. The axe came down in an overhead strike that sent another golden typhoon at Naruto. The blonde drove his fist into the coagulation of wind and knocked it aside, sending it into the lake. A beat of silence passed between the two, one gasping for air, while the other remained silent and stony-faced. "Where's the love of the fight?" Godric demanded, reaching up to pluck the broken arm from his back in a bloody pop. Grimacing, Naruto did not reply because, in all honesty, his foe didn't deserve it. Regardless of his physical strength and confusing physiology, Godric simply lacked the strength and speed to actually be a threat to Naruto. And while with each passing second, the demigod seemed to grow in power, there was still a literal ocean of difference between him and Naruto in terms of power. "What's to love about taking out the trash?" Naruto remarked, drawing a furious scowl from Godric. "Blackguard, I am the lord of all that is golden, yet you stand before me with hair of such wondrous gold and offer resistance. Insufferable, unforgivable. First, you threatened to invade me, and now you resist me." "Oh, for FCK's sake," Naruto gripped his face, keeping his temper in check. "Get your 15 generations inbred head out of your troll's butt. Who the hell told you that we were going to attack you? I didn't even know who you were until tonight." "More lies. Ignorant that you stand before a lord yet still offering naught but lies and filth. Tell me, boy, was your mother's slid stuffed with mud? 'Cause you strike me as one born from it." Naruto's fist thundered into the side of Godric's temple with such ferocity that it shattered the grafted's crown, his body rolling backwards before coming to a stop against a fallen tree. His eyes glowed red gold with slit pupils, incensed for a moment, on the verge of letting go of his restraint. He still had answers to get. A Rasengan formed in Naruto's hand before it quickly turned white, 3 additional Rasengans begging to orbit around it. Godric got to his feet, his face swollen and broken. He coughed up globs of BLD that he caught with his hand and looked at, though Naruto noticed something off about it. Holding up his hand, Godric flashed Naruto a sardonic smile. Missing most of his teeth, his BLD was no longer red but a dark gold. "See then, cur, the order doth bless me with the mark of kingship. My BLD thickens to be closer to the eternal." Naruto's eyes widened, seeing the increasing golden pulse of light from the rune on Godric's chest. He knew this feeling. You met the golden voice? That's what sent you here." "Blasphemy, I am my own lord. None commands me," Godric spat, shouldering his axe with a wince. I was informed of your treachery by the most glittering gold, and I shall take all that I can to get back to the capital and the light of the Erd tree. Godric pointed the end of his axe at Naruto, who looked at him askance. Then just go there, you demon creep. I would not sit upon the throne of Elden Lord without the strength to. More like your butt wouldn't fit in the seat. Naruto shook his head. Do you think your people are going to take well to your ugly butt ruling over them? Knowing that at any second you're going to rip off an arm or a leg and stick it where the sun don't shine. Godric snarled before his glowing gold eyes gained a perverse glint to them. Of course not, your body, on the other hand. Naruto glared. What? Yes, that will do just fine. He hefted the axe into both hands, running his six-fingered left arm along its length with a toothless smile, a golden body already encrusted with great runes, fit to sit upon the throne. I will have it. Godric raved, madness shining through the paranoia, beginning to stomp towards Naruto with the axe held out in front of him. I'll hold it in trust for you, little pissant. Such an honor to graft my head in place of yours. He bounded forwards now with the lope of a beast, frothing at the mouth with white foam and golden BLD. Naruto raised his hand to meet the beast, not a man in a cross, but was beholden to something new entering the fray. At the moment that Godric made his lunge, a figure leapt into the air above him from the destroyed remnants of a tower, their body illuminated by the light of the moon. Tall, broad, armored, and above all else, a wolf's head. The wolfman howled valiantly and swung his great Zweihander down in a front flip arc that landed squarely at the elbow joint of Godric's arm, where the armor was at its weakest. Godric roared in pained confusion, dropping his axe and looking in maddened shock at the interloper. The wolfman did not stop, leaning his entire weight against the sword until, with a sickening crunch, it lopped the elongated limb clean off. Seeing his chance, Naruto rushed in and moved his arm forwards, a chakra arm extending from his right hand to carry the planetary Rasengan into the heart of Godric's chest. The spheres ground against the agonized creature, twisting his hardy troll flesh like a baker mixing a cake, BLD both red and gold fountaining from the impact point. Naruto pushed the trio of Rasengans were SCK into their parent before it expanded and enveloped Godric's entire body in a tunneling beam of blue-silver power that picked up Godric with no resistance, carving a 70-meter smooth trench into the lakebed. Letting out a breath, Naruto strengthened up to face the wolfman, who let out an appreciative whistle at the blonde's attack. Turning to face him, the wolfman held up a hand in placation, palms out. Peace, friend, I'm no foe of yours. I got that when you lopped off his arm, but you made quite the entrance, Naruto replied, eyeing the golden axe under the water, still clutched in the severed six-fingered hand. Well, you seem to have the situation well in hand, if you'll pardon the pun. The other man, Wolf? Chuffed. He fixed the shorter man with a lupine smile. Name's Blade. You could say I'm an old friend of the family. Nodding in acceptance for now, Naruto turned back to the end of the trench, where an indistinct lump began to pull itself from the muck. Surely he couldn't have survived that? Blade questioned, shouldering his Zweihander. I was sure that you could fit what was left of him into a tinderbox. Holes are either stubborn or soft. This guy is definitely the former. Naruto quipped, but his eyes were anything but amused. I don't think it's entirely his idea to keep getting back up. Blade gave a confused sideways look as they both watched the lump stand up straight. Godric it wasn't pretty. All of his arms were either broken or missing. One of his legs was snapped against its own axis, while the other shook under his weight. His chest was nothing but a deep corkscrew of torn flesh and bone, the great rune glinting from the center of the hole. Most disturbing of all was his face. Rather the lack of one. The force of the twisting tempest that Naruto had thrown him through had succeeded in completely degloving the skin from Godric's face, leaving nothing but a bloody red skull that oozed rivulets of golden BLD and had a pair of glowing gold eyes, like stars dipped in pools of pitch. Lured alil thought ish guolian. Naruto winced at the ghoulish display, but his eyes locked in on the great rune at the heart of his chest. He could see feelers of golden light reaching out from its depths to line Godric's body, plucking and pulling ruined limbs to move even though they were little more than mulch and bone chits, dancing to the whims of an unseen puppeteer. What's the play? Blade asked, readying his sword. Naruto held out his hand to stop Blade before reaching up and grabbing the hilt of Kaiman strapped to his back. I'm going to cut his strings, he said with a resigned air. popping the odachi. Naruto slowly drew it from its sheath, and felt once again that unnatural yet familiar feeling waft from its black blade. Out of the corner of his eye, he could see Blade shiver despite the fact it was a warm night, the source quite obviously in his hand. Naruto held the blade aloft and noted idly that it did not reflect the light of the moon, and, on a whim, let his chakra run into it. The edge came alive in his hand, vibrating in his, and as an aura of blackness rose from Kaiman's blade, like thick ink flowing through the clearest water. He was no swordsman, but with an unearthly sureness, he knew this was the tool for the job. He stepped forwards, begging to walk towards his suffering yet mad foe, strolling before upping it to a jog, then a run before it was a full-blown sprint. Move Kaiman, its edge facing the stars. Naruto plunged the sword to the hilt into Godric's chest, causing glowing gold BLD to fountain from the wound. Naruto looked up into the creature's old and felt the echo of pity for Godric that his life could have led him to such a deplorable state. Then with both hands, Naruto lifted the blade upwards to part flesh like paper and, in one fluid motion, split Godric in two. The lipless mouth opened and closed several times, and his opponent attempted to reach for Naruto, fingers not but bones. Naruto did not resist, feeling that for the first time in a long time, Godric's mind was at ease. He felt the bony tips touch to his head before coming away to bring something in front of his quickly dulling eyes. The blonde realized what it was. Glinting in the light of the moon were strands of his sunny blonde hair. Gold. Godric let the golden strands slip from his fingers and toppled backwards, pitching into the lake, eyes no longer seeing. Naruto gently exhaled and gazed upon his fallen foe. It had been an easy fight against a pathetic man driven to an ignominious end, but he couldn't deny that he felt that the demigod was being used. Idly, he lifted Kaiman and looked at the blade and frowned thoughtfully. There was something stuck to the sword. Looking closer, he recognized it as Godric's great rune, impaled on the blade's length. Such a trifling little thing, he mused. Wonder what if is. His sixth sense blared a warning. Huh? The anchor rune glowed brilliant gold before detaching from Kaiman and strkng towards Naruto's chest. His free arm swept up to intercept, but the blasted thing swept under his limb and slammed home before he could do anything to protect himself. His eyes bulged and let out a silent scream as the rune burned a hole through his clothes and felt again that feeling of molten metal being run through his veins. He collapsed to one knee, senses overloading and unable to hear Kurama's roars of warning. Oh, there came the floor. Naruto crashed face first into the lake's surface, his body unresponsive. The last thing he registered before the darkness of unconsciousness took him was the visage of an appealing woman descending towards him, silhouetted by the moon. Were one but to listen, they might hear the greater will howling impotently in cosmos. Blade had blundered. It was a particularly bad blunder at that, one he really could. You see, he'd lingered a tad too long in Rhea Lucaria. Not his fault. Really, it wasn't. He'd wanted to make certain Godric was dead. That and the blonde BSTRD was all right. He'd fought strong, real strong, and he was almost certain he'd gone and gained a great rune from it, even if the gaining of said rune had knocked him right out. So like any good friend, he'd turned him over onto his back. Nothing untoward. Just enough to make sure he didn't wind up drowning in the shallow waters of the bay. Unfortunately, in doing so, he'd glimpsed the other great runes glowing on the boy's back. He'd contemplated telling Ranni of this latest discovery before the moon descended and everything went sideways, which brought Blade to the here and now. The present moment in which he found himself staring down an angry carrion queen. So yes, blunders. Many had he made. Why, hello dear, Blade. Renala smiled thinly as she hoisted Naruto's unconscious form into her arms. How kind of you to visit after all these years after I thought thee dead. So kind indeed. Blade certainly didn't seem to think so. Right then, he edged back from her dangerous smile. I'll just be on my way. Let's pretend you didn't see me. Her staff slammed into the wall ahead of him with an ear-splitting frack, splintering the mortal to bar his passage. Or not. He raised his hands, keeping them well away from his sword. Suppose I'm in for it, aren't I? Yes. Ranni's conjured another spell with 2 fingers. Yes, you are. Would you kindly sit? An unseen weight hit Blade's body from above, causing his knees to buckle. He crashed face first into the ground and was knocked right out. Are you awake? Well, would you look at that? He was. Not a stabbing pain or a sudden start by any means. One moment Naruto was resting comfortably on something quite soft. In the next light, he heard a faint melody, the sound of someone humming in the dark. Light hit his eyes, and he opened them. A quick blink served to orient himself as he looked up, frowned, and found himself staring at. "Please remain still," a familiar voice hummed. "You are safe. Those who would do you harm are far from here, and the rest have been slain at our hands." Renala. "Yes?" She smiled down at him, idly stroking his forehead with one palm. "Why is my head in your lap?" "Because I placed it there," she admitted frankly. I see. He tried to nod, winced now when his neck protested the sudden movement. "And why did you do that?" "To make you comfortable, of course." Her brow furrowed in faint concern. "Do you not wish to be?" Ouch. You could weaponize a pout like that. Maybe he didn't need to move just yet. She dipped her head down and embraced his nose. Little more than a peck really, but he felt his face warm up all the same. Not satisfied, she lingered, embraced his cheek now, followed by his lips, mouth moving sweetly against his. By the log, he'd never get used to that, wanting someone to have and hold. Nice and all, but it was these little day-to-day gestures that made his heart race. "This is kinda nice, actually." She leaned back, humming in appreciation. "How do you feel?" "Fair question." Kurama garbled an angry string of gibberish in his head that summed things up quietly nicely. "Sore," he said at last. "Feels like I got hit by a truck." She blinked. "What, pray tell, is a truck?" Right. She didn't know what those were. "I'll explain later." "I should hope so." The queen tutted, tweaking his ear. "Dear Blade has told me what transpired. You have gained another great rune." "Blade?" He tried to rise, only to wince. "Where is he? He all right?" "He is convalescing comfortably in another room." Her smile was a touch strained. "Worry not," she amended at his worried look. "He is in good health. He simply wished to leave. I would not allow it, not with his injuries. You may visit him at your leisure." Had Blade gotten hurt helping him out? He couldn't remember. And what was this about a great rune? His memory proved slow to recall at first. Finally, it came to him. "Yeah, I remember the diamond thing ducking under my arm and hitting me." He lifted his shirt to get a better look at it. Right here. Sure enough, there it was, dead center in his chest, glimmering faintly, beating in time with his heart. "Well, at least it doesn't hurt." He lowered his shirt with a sigh, and heard Renala make a noise of disappointment. He quirked a brow at her. "Were you staring?" The faintest hint of pink dusted her pale cheeks, but her smile didn't waver. "I was not." He grinned, pleased to have caught her looking. "Pretty sure you were." "I was not." Her smile didn't waver. In any case, a quick cough railroaded him before he could needle her further. "There is another matter I wish to bring to your attention, but it can wait if you wish to rest." "Mother," little Millicent came skidding around the corner, slipped, and fell flat on her face at their feet. "She's awake. Come quickly." "Never mind that," Renala preened, all worries forgotten. "You called me mother." Millicent froze, face gone redder than her hair. Her moment of hesitation cost her most dear. In an instant Renala swept an arm down to scoop her up, planting her beside them. "What?" Naruto chuckled under his breath. "Did we adopt another kid while I was out?" Renala's pivoted toward him, expression quite quizzical. "How did you know?" His face fell into a deadpan to surpass all deadpans. "You're kidding me." Renala wasn't kidding. In short order, he found himself stood beside her before a large door. Frustrated noises came within, masked by girlish giggles. Familiar giggles. He laid an ear against the heavy oak frame and was rewarded with another laugh, giddy and free. The ghost of a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. He heard an angry, raised voice, to which she only giggled all the more. "Mel got in there, didn't she?" "She most certainly did." Renala touched one hand to her cheek with a sigh. "We tried to keep the newcomer isolated, but as you can see, that failed the moment Melina leaned of her existence. She's been keeping her distracted ever since, bless her little heart." Millicent squirmed against her side, quietly curious. "And it would seem our second daughter is curious to meet her as well." The little redhead squeaked softly and clutched at her robe. Well, nothing ventured, nothing gained. He swung the door open and found himself staring at an older-eyed lass, somewhat older than Melina or Millicent, wearing a fearsome scowl and long dark hair besides, the latter of which was even now being bound back into a flowing ponytail by Melina herself. Also pigtails, a great many pigtails, none of which she looked pleased about. "Papa," Melina turned a gormless grin on him. Look, I found another one. Can we keep her? Please? Whomever you are, kill me." The new girl turned a pleading look upon him. "Right, now, I beg of thee." Naruto looked back to Rennala, wholly at a loss. Who is this sassy lost child? I know not. He caught the hint of something in her voice. Just then, she was found sleeping in the library by Moongrim. He found her wrapped in a pile of robes. Curious, is it not? The girl twitched. Definitely something going on here. What was the saying? 2 was company, 3 was a crowd. It really didn't feel like that. Here. He was more concerned about the where as to the why. Had that DMN golden voice dropped another kid in his lap just to spite him? Why is this place a magnet for lost children? He flung up his arms. Is there something in the water? You must decide what to do with her. He rounded on Rennala, utterly incredulous. Why me? She flushed. Because my judgment is admittedly skewed in the matter. Skewed, she said. Ha, that was putting it mildly. Rennala's love for children was unsurpassed. Even if there was something odd about this one, he could sense her intentions well enough. 3 was but a number to her, and a small one at that. She'd raised a trio of her own after all. Why would she balk at raising a gaggle of girls? A wild, incredulous part of him wondered just how high that number would climb. 5? 7? Dare he say 9? Just thinking about it threatened to make his head spin. I guess we'll keep her? Unable to bear Rennala's stare, he finally looked away, scratching the back of his head. Doesn't feel right to just turn her out of the academy. Lovely, her face said it all. He'd walked right into her trap. Do you hear that, girls? Melina summed it up nicely. New sister. Millicent groaned into her hands. This is my life now, isn't it? Didn't stop her from peeking through her fingers at the newcomer. You donned mine, do you? Naruto turned to face the girl, wanting her opinion in all this. I mean, it doesn't look like you've got anywhere to go. Don't suppose you've got a name? He expected some manner of anger. Protest at the very least. None came. Not a word, not a tantrum, not a jot. Beneath their expectant gazes, the newcomer fidgeted restlessly, staring at her toes. As they looked on, her face turned positively pink. Selen, if it pleases you. Melina jumped onto her back and held tight with a giggle. Hello, Sel. Say my name properly, you little urcho. What's the use? Naruto patted her head. She flushed deeper still. Welcome to the family. Selen. Well, this was humiliating. Somewhere in Selen's grand plan she hadn't accounted for this, being bounced on Rennala's knee like the child she now was. What made it worse was that she'd retained most of her faculties. Oh yes, she was well aware of her plight, and the spectacular blunder she'd made. For the life of her, she didn't know how to get out of this. Nay, if it was even possible. Preserving her cover was paramount. The blonde man, scary, might not suspect her, but she was almost certain someone would, and if they did, I know who thou art. Selen stiffened as Rennala whispered in her ear. And I must say, I'm rather enjoying thy comeuppance. The carrion queen hummed, rubbing the small of her back. Didst thou think to fool me? Her mouth opened and closed like a guppy. Rennala preened. There's the Selen I knowth, so sure she knows more than her teachers, so surprised when they prove her wrong. Why the facade then, of this childish bliss? Selen grumbled. Thou art a brat, Selen, but one I am proud of. Consider this. A century's comeuppance for being a bad student. I'd rather you throw me to the wolf. Oh, he'll be joining us for the family painting, though thou shalt sit upon thy father's lap instead. The angry pout that followed was the stuff of legends. Blast it all, this was her life. Now, wasn't it?